Thursday, and then it's not open on Sunday. Right. And you were open with 3 on Saturdays with some exceptions, okay, well, you know, that show I'll be there on Saturdays, you know. They're, you know, they're. That is. So this on, yes. I had one of these, and then when I was living in the first time, and I got myself another, you know, this is, yeah. Yeah, it's. Okay. Yeah. But I need for the people. And that's, we don't get to slur on the big screen.
No, presenter to this big screen.
What's that?
The presenter can even just be on. Everybody got it?
Oh, that's what you.
The lawyers.
The trades. Well, yeah, but how she can access. The TV.
She can borrow a laptop.
She's coming here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's coming, I would think HDMI, but whatever she wants, she can also join and share it.
So we're gonna put drivers for that, the new laptop is not picking them automatically.
Hmm, yeah. That's the thing, so.
Those kinds of video. Because I had a.
Might be.
Yeah, I noticed.
She's going down, I know she's crying, I said, please don't come. I said, but it's PG, but I didn't know that, yeah, but it's something over my life. Oh, last section compared.
Hey, hello. You know, I think in the beginning, our name tag should be the other direction, so we know where we're sitting.
Oh.
Cool.
Anyways. We get everything good?
Seems like it.
Thanks.
Thinking she's gonna wanna use her laptop, the HDMI, but we'll see. She can also join the call and shit.
Right.
That's the her.
It's on later.
Okay.
We can talk.
Have you talked to them? Yeah.
No, I am going, I will check the door. I don't know if it's the bucket, but the door keeps opening and closing
Oh,
automatically.
yeah, we can figure out how to get it to stay unlocked.
What?
Somebody knows.
I picked some cherries and some bugs are falling on me now. Oh, you made it! Yay! All right.
Yeah, she's. Look. It is a program. I know, like they say, the whole stack of them. Oh, yeah, that's fine. That's only that's one here. Thank you. Now the video, thank you, that you were there. And that's what I'm really good with things that I ask, you know. Maybe it's. They hear you pages. I know I had different notebooks, I had one, it's just one end up, without taking one food. They give you any. She looked through it, and I have some other dedicated ones. Oh, this is. This is. Oh, yeah. This is one of those COVID issues. You need to judge it as, I was my friend. No, that's it, I have a favorite, just a calendar, those that, these are several models set out. There are things that we have on books. And one of those is. Really fun, these things, Well, every year I get another thing. It's a new one's shopping for. What do you want? But this one, it's got to go.
Are you Rose?
Yeah, yeah. And then, okay, so. Oh, I get letters since, yeah, and then I'm going to put there, oh, no, I've done that too. And, I was at the university, they used to have ocean, this kind of just standard. That was, I don't like to, but you want to, you don't, sometimes I'll actually three, that I can't move with those in this one. It's not really nice. And the first year I'll have to get something else, that's a big thing. Because I do feel like there's a, but I said, it's not a level. I was thinking that you caught my dog, the first thing I fixed, I was mad. Just reminded me. It was different. And those stories. And one of them, they had to be, I read that. I was telling Julian, that night. It's still, it's the birds.
And you.
Right. It's policy, but I mean, oh, the roads. So many different things. It's not. This is rain, so. Hello. Julie. So how about this? Maybe these are the ones. No,
I'm just kidding. I better not start any nasty rumors.
Jeremy, I'm gonna do notes tonight, so you don't need to.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Would you like a laptop?
Did you try out the little actual pen?
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Well, this here, I couldn't get the video camera working with it, so I'll see if I can get the drivers for it, but yeah, that's great.
So far, it's not falling.
Oh, nice. Yeah, cause you saw it.
Hey, oh, thank you. You put it down there.
Oh, I can turn the door on.
Oh, yep.
That makes sense.
That's for that.
Thanks.
By the time I got back, we had already taken.
Hi, Jim. That's cool.
chaotic right now. Huh?
Crazy.
I had to go pick up my glasses. Yeah. I'm,
I love that, and it's, so it's like, that one time, yeah, like, it's just. He was trying to tell some underlying, they all use actions.
yeah.
Well,
Nice people on the trailers, pillars.
Oh, yeah.
That's the first thing they ask.
You know, it's kind of like.
I know just that. we're waiting for something to help.
You know, it's trying to get that shower.
Yeah.
It makes sense. You have to keep straight. That's hard. It's about my day. Yeah.
We have some.
Yes.
I just think it's around like a price minus five. That's kind of scary. And autos, they go out all the.
Yeah. You were on.
No.
Oh, okay.
Was that?
Oh.
We had another. So we had a little. Everything we just. Need this. That's. I yours.
Like, okay.
Yeah. We got it.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a right. More or less the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it needs to space of who's got year one. And then you come to that.
Right.
So that's how it fitted.
They're a little small.
Yeah, that's.
It's on.
I know. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have the form or something. Yes, you already have. Oh, yeah.
I love to use some.
We chatted.
No, I just got that.
You came down to that.
Do you mind?
Yeah. Yes, and I said, I don't need it. Well, good.
Tomorrow.
Oh, we
How do
really.
you oppose?
Oh, this is my sense.
One. Yeah. It was good.
Yeah, thank you.
Northwood. Yeah, I think she read Yeah, she very.
So they consider.
They got this, it's not trail.
Okay, I have to say, I'm supporting that, oh my god. All week long, I thought they were like Friday. Yeah, it's been. I can always tell I'm not putting it around. Gotta be.
I got what you. All right.
Yeah.
I need to take care of.
Yeah. Oh, okay, that's. Don't worry. Oh, no. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We're not wrong.
Yeah, we got this,
I avoid.
I'm sure.
I wonder about. Having house. We would use the brush there.
Still, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, my man, I already think about which. Which.
And then he.
I think you were. Well. It's only weeks.
He writes that too, right? Yeah, that's what we're gonna do. Things like that. That's the thing. It used to be nice.
Just
That
always,
I like it. Alright, that's what I'm asking about, yeah. So I got the.
And just.
Thing, I mean, I was not. Yeah. I like that. I like this about art.
Your problems, like, mine and your problems, so.
The dogs.
No. Is it?
Yeah. That's when I'm. Cindy.
Yeah, just, just name, take up.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, never seen that. Oh, yeah, it's good. And just.
She's on the first one now.
See here.
Back when they were in the shoes.
No. If you go to the. How big is this? No. So.
Yeah, she's kept outside calling the. She's a. They're like, that's what Joe was looking at. Coming out of the star.
And then on that. There's I can find out leaders. So that man. You can get 1 10 or 2 4 you can get it like that. But yeah, we come down. You'll see how I am. Yeah, I mean, if I'm already got shot. I was just going to say. You know.
Jeremy, And so we can watch that next. Hey, everybody. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Are you the designated, let's figure out how to do this guy?
Yeah, pretty much. How do you normally plug it in now?
In here.
There's a bunch of leaves on the ground. Well, they're at the whole bunch of fair steps.
USB on one side.
Yeah.
Bill?
Really, this thing does not have any type of HDMI out.
Well, it has multiple ports, but.
All right, those are all USB-C there.
Okay, and then
That looks like a card reader, and this one here is regular USB, it looks like.
Yeah.
I don't see anything that would normally plug into it.
Do you have a laptop that'll work? I just email it to whoever's laptop that is, because
We got the one we're running Zoom on.
It would, will that one work with the projector? If it will, and it does, then I can just send the presentation there.
What? I can log into something.
Okay, or I have it here too. Either way, if you have it ready to go, you can just send it. Yeah, that's probably be faster.
Is there a power button in this thing?
Good question, probably. Yay, so far so good. Look, everything is organized.
I award them to you. You know. Darling, there's so few, thank you so much. Oh.
Yep. Does everybody have handouts?
We have hands. Darling made full copies.
Nice work, Darla.
And then we'll discuss later. What we're gonna do if people are having.
Did you work out whether you wanna connect to the monitor or?
Apparently the ports for your projector don't work with my laptop, so we're gonna try to do it.
Are you showing wireless?
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy is saving us all from technology.
Well, the wireless ID is a good one.
You know, wireless.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we do it?
Yeah. That one might be better. Do you want to get on your laptop? Can you connect it to the Zoom meeting?
No. Is that gonna require like sharing my screen and things that I struggle with? If, is it possible to do that through that laptop?
You just bought this laptop today, so.
Is that,
You just bought this laptop today, so I'm working on it.
I hope not for this, not for this week.
Oh, I did. Yeah, you might be working.
Okay. And I haven't tried to do that before with my PowerPoint. Is it just you sign in like you would for Zoom and then somehow I figure out how to do it?
So that's why I said that's for the
Sister, she has a 28-year-old son.
Okay.
She quit using the I'm sorry.
I need different words.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah, one.
My son got married and started changing it. So
Well, that's
Was it the Samsung CU 8000 one?
Oh, can you project right to the TV?
Me? That,
Is that what you're asking about?
well, no, the question was, can we just do this via Wi-Fi, but I'm trying to figure out which network to sign on to.
Oh, COL guest.
I know, it's kind of long, isn't it? Maybe the name of this person.
And then I can hear.
Available. Let's see what this is. There it is. Connect.
Yeah, you might have to just take.
Kind of long.
You can take it with you if you want to.
EACLE 5 dash Frankish dash durably. The good news is nobody would ever guess.
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, it says HDMI two.
What's that?
I can see it's HDMI two.
I know, I'm trying to figure out how to switch it over.
If we can't figure it out, if we can't figure it out soon, one thing we can do is, since everybody has a copy. Jeremy's got it?
Yeah.
Okay, do you still need?
And we already.
That's what I'm saying, is we can work from that. Okay, do you still need me to sign on?
And even.
Jeremy, do I continue trying to sign on to Wi-Fi, or do you have a different
I think we're okay with the packet.
plan? Oh,
That's okay with you.
with the packet, are you talking about the slides? I'd like to project the slides, but I don't know if you're working on something different from what I'm doing.
No, I'm looking at the same thing.
EACLE 5 dash Frankish dash. Okay, that's connected. The suggestion was to sign in through Zoom. Is there a Zoom link for this meeting?
I don't know if I can go get this thing up there. Laptop is muted.
Is there a Zoom link for this meeting? That, okay, just, can you give me that? I don't have it.
Are you on the?
What's that? Yes. Well, yes. I've connected to the Wi-Fi.
Open your browser and go to Lebanon. The Zoom link is on the homepage.
None of that matters if we can't get it up on the screen.
If we can't get it up on the screen
Oh,
and you're having trouble getting it up on the screen,
yeah.
can't you just pick the display as a TV?
Yeah, you think so, but nothing's working. We're supposed to. I haven't done this in very long time. It says it's working.
Samsung? Is it Samsung?
Yes.
This site can't be reached. Try that again. Just Lebanon.
If you just notice too, like the Google and searching it, and it should pull up. Hopefully not my. That's really slow, even with being on.
Yeah. Well, you know what we could do? There's a workaround. Is, let's see. Is I can bring it up here, and then assuming everybody can sort of see, if they have the slides in front of them, to just walk through them that way.
We do.
Okay, and then that way we don't necessarily need to project them.
That would be my suggestion, is to go with the physical thing for now.
Yeah, and I'll bring up.
Given we're already. we can-
Oh, you can pull them up from the email, but you can't get them.
I still can't project them.
For that way, so you're saving. So you're both. Yeah.
We'll get it fixed for next time.
Okay, not the first time that you hunted in my career. Slideshow,
Started from. Yeah.
or beginning. All right.
Guess I have to start the meeting though, because it's
Oh,
an actual meeting.
Okay, yep, go ahead.
Ethan? I start recording you. Allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice. All right, I'll do a quick roll call and then we'll hand it over to Eileen. Jeremy. Darla.
Sorry.
Darla.
Present.
Present.
Oh, present, sorry.
Zero.
Present.
I'm here. Okay, Eileen, it's all yours.
Okay, I'm gonna come up with some way that elevates the screen. As you saw, we struggled to get the slide up on the screen, but we can't figure out how to do that without keeping everybody here all night, and we don't want that.
So here's what we're gonna do. I don't know how well you can see that. These are the slides that we're gonna be walking through today, and you have, thank you, Darla, I have a copy of all of these here. So if you can follow along on paper, I'll sort of tell you where we are in the whole scheme of things, okay? Before we get started, first, I kind of like to get a sense of who's here. If you could just quickly tell me your name and who you're representing here, that would be very helpful. So you start with you, Jeremy.
Jeremy, board member.
Okay.
And board member.
I'm Rochelle, I'm the full person.
Full person.
Full director, Darla, board.
Okay, thank you. And, well, let me get look at the class attendees. Are there members of the public? Is that what you guys are? Okay, I hope, hold that thought for a minute. Let me see. A new board member, welcome to the. Okay. You're a member of the public, okay?
I'm Elaine Palmer, community member.
Okay,
Jim, I'm the pool operator.
okay, good. So we've got a couple staff people here and back here.
I'm Rose, I'm just public.
Public, okay.
I'm Robert Waterhouse, I'm the treasurer for Friends of the Pool Organization.
Oh, okay, all right, for the nonprofit,
Mhm.
okay.
Now I have
Public,
David McQueen, Ward Chief Counsel.
okay, great. Thank you. My name is Eileen Akins. I'm an attorney. I represent the Lebanon Aquatic District. I have about 100 sexual clients, so this is one of them. Just a quick rundown, my firm is, it's on your slides, it's on the title slide, Northwest Local Government Legal Advisors, LLC, roll.com. My law practice focuses entirely on local government entities, primarily special districts, which is what the Lebanon Aquatic District is. So I've been doing this work for 20-something years. I enjoy it very much, mostly because of people like you. Special districts in particular are a very important part of the community. I know you guys all feel that here, and that to me is very meaningful and makes your work meaningful. And so, as we go along, I want to reassure you that I'm aware of the importance of people in your community, and I think that's hugely important. It's encouraging to see members of the public here. I do these trainings in all kinds of different contexts. One of the favorite parts of my work is to work with boards on helping them sort of understand their roles and responsibilities. Most of the stuff we're going to be talking about today also applies to staff. So I'm glad to see there's some staff members here. To the extent that there's going to be a dialogue with me, I'd like to limit it for now to the people, the members of the board and staff. Members of the public are welcome to listen. There may come a point when we'll invite questions and comments, but for now, this is dedicated to the board, which is my client, and we'll start there, okay? I'm trying to think of something preliminary, other preliminary stuff I can share with you. We'll figure it out as we go. If you have any questions, specific board members about me, this is a public meeting. It's an advertised public meeting that was based on my recommendation, because what that enables the board to do is to talk freely amongst yourselves. There is under the public meetings law, there's an exception for, it's not a public meeting if all you're doing is getting training. However, you're stuck just getting trained. You can't really converse much about anything, because once you start deliberating about anything, that it morphs into a public meeting. And in order to do that, you have to have published notice. So the fact that you guys have done this makes this a published, posted or published public meeting. And so everything about this is public. All right. Okay. Let me go ahead and get started off the cuff. I apologize that we're getting started a little bit late, but I think we can make this all work efficiently. Just figure out on my own laptop how to advance my slides. Okay, we're going to start with what is a special district. The Lebanon Aquatic District is a special district. That might not mean anything to you, so let's just start there. A special district in Oregon is a form of local. It is the closest analogy is a city. However, special districts are governed, they're typically smaller, and cities can do a bunch of different things. Cities can provide water and fire and sanitary and gas under the city authority. A special district, by definition, is provided special service. So a special district in Oregon is a municipal corporation, and they're formed for a specific reason. There are about 1,000 special districts in Oregon. The Lebanon Aquatic District is formed as a park and recreation district. And I'm going to elaborate on what that authority means. So there are water districts, sanitary districts, fire districts, soil and water conservation districts, vector control districts, fire. There's any number of special districts, and they exist for a specific purpose. All right. So for you guys, it's going to be park and recreation, and by virtue of that, you operate the pool. Okay. So special district, municipal corporation, it is a public entity. Okay. The laws that apply to the state of Oregon and that apply to counties and that apply to cities also apply to special districts, which is what we are, which is why we're concerned in part because the special district, the public meetings requirements. What I'm going to talk to you, I've been talking with Darla and Tim a little bit about what we think would be most helpful now. I'm grateful to see that there are some new board members here. This kind of training is, especially if you haven't done public service like this before, hugely helpful to at least explain the context of the work that you're doing. All right, so this training is designed primarily to explain to the board what your roles and responsibilities are and potential liabilities and authorities. And then we'll talk a little bit, assuming we have enough time and everybody doesn't fall asleep, we'll talk about we'll touch on some basic public meetings requirements and a couple of other subjects, but then we're going to start with the authority of the district, the authority of the board, and how the board does its business, okay? All right, so that's what a special district is. So you got to think of yourself like a municipal corporation, much like a city. Cities, what authority does a special district have? Special districts in Oregon are considered creatures of statute, which means that just about everything that the board does or that the staff does, there's a statute of written down law that applies to what you do, all right? So the authority, any authority that the board has in terms of governance or decision-making has to be based in a statute. Okay, if you exceed your authority in what the statute says, then that can get you into legal trouble. There's something, this common law, I don't know if you're familiar with legal terminology, common law, which is kind of the law we brought with us from England, and case law. There's something that's called Dillon's rule. You don't have to remember this specifically, but what this says is that a local government can, if you're a private corporation, which you're not, you can go and do anything that you want to, as long as there's not a law against it. So you have a lot of freedom to create, you know, to merge, consolidate, new product lines, whatever you want to do, you have a lot more freedom there. In comparison, a special district or a local government has only that authority. Here's how it's stated. A local government may exercise power. Oh, I don't have my glasses back on. Keep taking them off. A local government may exercise powers that are expressly provided for by law or are necessarily implied. So what that means is just about everything that a district can do, that the board can do, you have to have specific authority to do that. Okay, and you can't just sort of wing it or say, well, we think it'd be a really good idea to do this other thing, which is not statutorily authorized. If you exceed what your statutory authority is, that's called being ultra vires legally, which means you're actually outside the course scope, and we'll talk about how that can get you into trouble. All right, so what is expressly provided authority for a special district? The list that you have there are the written down laws that apply to you guys. ORS, when you see that abbreviated, Oregon Revised Statutes, those are Oregon's code of laws, the ones that are written down and apply to Oregon specifically. When you see that acronym or that abbreviation, that's what that's referring to. So when we talk about, let's take the Lebanon Aquatic District, for example, ORS Chapter 198 is a statute, chapter in the statute that applies to special districts generally. So whatever type of district you are, park and recreation, fire, water, etc., that's kind of the umbrella statute. And if you were to go read that statute, it'll tell you how to form a district, how to dissolve one, how to merge, how to consolidate, how to prepare an ordinance. The compensation for board members is coming out of there. So it applies to almost all special districts in Oregon kind of had their origins out of Chapter 198. And if you're that wonky, all of this is available online. You can go read it for fun. The second one, however, is more important, which we're called the Principal Act. Every type of special district has a statute, a chapter in Oregon Revised Statutes that describe what your authorities are. And it varies depending on the type of district that you are. So does anybody know offhand what the number is for Park and Recreation District? You got the 60 part right. 266. So if you wanted to go online and put in Oregon Revised Statutes, go to Chapter 266, and I've provided some of that for you, but that's where the authority of a Park and Recreation District is coming from. Talks about who's eligible to be on the board, how many board members there are, what you're authorized to do, etc. So we're going to elaborate a little bit more on that shortly. There are also some other statutes that will apply to the stuff that you do. There's specific statute 255 that deals with special district elections. So if you are running for election, that authority is coming out of 255. There's someone for bonds. There's some separate ones for contracting. There also may be administrative rules that apply to the extent that you guys may be subject to the Oregon Health Authority requirements, etc. Those are administrative rules that are adopted by administrative agencies. You'll see that spelled out as OAR, Oregon Administrative Rules. And then ordinances are a form of expressly provided authority, which are your own local laws. Not every type of district has the authority to adopt an ordinance that you guys do. So your ordinances are your rules and regulations. So if the board wants to adopt rules about who can attend the pool and who can't, and what requirements for getting in the pool and not getting in the pool, et cetera, those are going to come in the form of an ordinance. Okay, and stop me if I'm losing you at any point. I'm going to start out pretty globally, and I'm going to boil this down to some basic, some more detailed stuff. All right. So for the Lebanon Aquatic District, what is expressly provided authority? And as we said, it's coming out of ORS Chapter 266. So if you were going to go look that up, one of the things that you would find would be 266410, which says general district powers. And I'll just run through that quickly. There's not a lot there. Every district, which would be including this district, has the power to have and use a common seal, which is sort of old antiquated language for the fact that you are a entity in your own right, to sue and be sued. If you decide you need to bring a lawsuit or someone sues you, the entity itself has the authority to sue and be sued in its own right. To construct, reconstruct, alter, enlarge, operate, and maintain such lakes, parks, recreation grounds, and buildings as in the judgment of the district board are necessary or proper, and for this purpose to acquire by lease, purchase, gift, blah, blah, blah. So essentially what it says is that you can operate a swimming pool, among other things. You could operate a park, anything that counts as a park and recreation related stuff. You have the authority to do that. And then the second part of that is in order to achieve that, you could buy land, you could build something, you could lease land, you have the ability to acquire the property or build what you need to do that. And then, it's hard for me to read this sideways. Such real and personal property and rights of way, either within or without the limits of the district. So you guys have the ability to operate facilities outside your geographical boundaries, and not every special district does. In the judgment of the board, are necessary or proper, and to pay for and hold the same. And then the final one is to make and accept any and all contracts, deeds, leases, releases, and documents, etc. So essentially that says that you can enter into contracts and binding agreements, the entity itself, okay? So that's, in summary, the authorities that a park and recreation district has. You can also assess, levy, and collect taxes. That's authorized there, as long as you're using it to pay for those things that you are that are recreational in nature. You can employ all necessary agents and assistants. So this says you can employ people. Good news for the staff. Make and enforce regulations, which is your ordinances that you can enforce against the public. You actually have the authority, if you wanted to establish processes for removal of garbage and other deleterious substances and all other sanitary regulations, which is kind of interesting. Governing the conduct of the users of the facilities, so that you can have ordinances that affect the people who use your facilities. And you can enact penalties to prohibit any person violating any rule or regulation from thereafter using the facilities of the district for such period as the board may determine. Now a park and recreation district has the authority to adopt local laws. So your ordinances, and why there's sort of a laborious process to adopt an ordinance, is because it is a law. All right, it's a local law that the board has the authority to enforce against the public. All right. Again, not every type of special district has that authority, but you do. You can call necessary or proper elections after the district is formed. You can enlarge the boundaries as one would for a special district. You can compel all residents and owners within the district to connect their houses and habitation with the sewers, drains, etc. That's an interesting authority for a park district. Collect reasonable charges. So that number 12 has to do with the fact that you can charge people to use the pool. You have the authority to do that. And then the last one is generally to do and perform any and all acts necessary and proper to the complete exercise and blah, 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 blah. So that's kind of a catch-all. If it's related to what you need to do, but it's not spelled out here, that's kind of that catch-all. You still have the authority to do that within limits. Okay. Any questions about that piece of it? Where the authority is coming from? Okay. Knowing your principal act, knowing where to find it, is kind of board member step one. All right. If you, it's kind of interesting to read it. I would recommend you get the opportunity to go scan it. Some of it's a little wonky, but a lot of it might be like, you could go read that. So understanding that is important for the board to understand, because that's where your authority resides. All right. So that's where the authority, the board is going to get its power, essentially. So in that context, the board of directors for any special district is the governing body. Okay, the board is responsible for running the district. The board is responsible for approving policies. The board is responsible for overseeing the budget. The board is responsible for ensuring that you're complying with the budget. So the responsibilities of the operations start with the board. The buck stops with the board. Okay, so important for the board to understand the scope of its responsibilities. What are the board's legal duties? And this is again coming out of the statutes, and this is specific for the Park and Recreation District statute. Here's what the board can do. The Park and Recreation Board is the governing power of the district and shall exercise all powers of the district. At its first meeting and soon thereafter, yada, 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 the board shall choose one of its members as president. So this is about how you pick officers. You guys know how to do that. The board shall hold meetings either in the day or the evening. Isn't that lovely that you have that option and that they thought they'd spell it out in the statute? As may be necessary, the board shall fill any vacancy on the board as provided in ORS 198-320. Remember, 198 is special districts generally. So all special district boards fill their vacancies in the same way, which means that the majority of the board appoints someone to fill vacancy until the election can be held to fill that position. And
Can I ask you a question right there?
Mhm.
So we actually have a board vacancy.
yay!
So is there a specific amount of time that the application process is supposed to be left open?
There is no time limit. There's not a lot of direction at all, frankly, in the statutes. What the statutes say is that the board is responsible for filling vacancies. It doesn't, however, say what happens if you don't. What happens operationally is it can be very difficult to pass things because you don't have enough votes to pass things. So for example, if you have a 5-member board and you have a vacancy, you end up sometimes with a 2-2 vote, which means you can't do anything. All right, so the advantage of filling your vacancies is that it enables you to conduct business efficiently. So to answer your question, Kim, there's not any specific requirement. In my opinion, the application should remain open until you have filled the position. But I don't recommend leaving them vacant indefinitely if you can help it. I mean, worst case scenario, it's going to be vacant until the next election. But operationally speaking, it's the board's responsibility to try to fill that position to the best of your ability. If you try and you can't, nobody's gonna, sue you for that, but you're supposed to try.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does. I just was trying to make it work in my head that if at some point we're gonna take the applications that exist and do interviews and then choose somebody, but if the process is still open and we do interviews and then we haven't picked anyone yet, and then someone else says, oh, well, here's my application, how long do we drag out late people coming for applications? So it was just kind of where I was trying
Yeah,
to.
you really have the discretion to put a deadline on it. I would
Okay.
say if you're interested, apply by, I don't know, August 31st.
Right.
But after that, too bad. You have that discretion to do that, or to change it. If you're finding that nobody's applying and you want to keep it open longer, you can do that. But the board collectively should be deciding how long do we want to keep this open.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but that interview process, if the entire board is doing it, must be done in an open meeting, public meeting.
So we did that last time in an open meeting. However, we did each interview separately and made the rest of the people stay outside. Is
That's
okay?
reasonable.
That's okay.
That's fine. In general, you don't typically exclude anybody from the meeting, but if you ask them to step outside, then they do, that's fine.
Okay.
I guess it is a common misunderstanding, but we're gonna talk about executive sessions a little bit. There is an inclination when you're picking somebody for a position, and it could be potentially sort of awkward and controversial to be like, well, let's do it in executive session, and then they don't have to hear what we say about them. Just so you know, you can do that when you're interviewing employees, but you can't do that when you're interviewing board members. So bear that in mind. And we'll elaborate a little bit more on that when we get to executive session. All right, so that's the board. Board is the governing body of the district. The board appoints officers, and then you can have your meetings in the evening or in the day. Oh, thank goodness. Sometimes what pops up in the statute is kind of entertaining. All right, and these are the board's, basically, fiduciary obligations, all right? Because the buck stops with the board, and if the district is gonna be sued, it's because they're gonna name the board as potential, defendants. Ensure the district operates in a legal and fiscally responsible manner. Enter into legal agreements on behalf of the district. Only the board can bind the district legally to a contractual agreement. They can delegate some of that authority elsewhere, like the staff, but the buck always stops with the board. Okay, the board can bind the district legally. They oversee financial operations, establish legislation by ordinance when appropriate, establish district-wide policies, and policies, ordinances or laws. Policies are internal operations, like your employee manual, your contracting rules, your public records policy. Those are govern your internal operations, and the board is a policy-making board. The board's responsibilities are to adopt legislation and policy and to oversee the operations of the district. They can delegate authority when appropriate. Should be done formally, so everybody knows what authority is being delegated. And then they're responsible for supervising the chief executive officer, if there is one. You guys have a manager, an executive director. The board collectively is that person supervising. Okay, the executive director answers to the board, and then everybody under the executive director is the responsibility of the executive director in general. The board has some say over that, but in general, that's how it's supposed to work. Okay. Any questions about that we've covered? Okay. Can anyone serve on the district board? Anyone? Anyone? Do you know the answer to that question? You have to be qualified to serve. Usually you have to be an elector, which means that you are eligible to vote in district elections. So you have to be at least 18 years old, and you have to reside in the district, or you have to be able to vote in the district. Most of the time it's a residence requirement in order to serve on the board. Here's the statute for you guys that speaks to that. The officers of the district shall be a board of 3 or 5. You guys have 5. You could have had 3, which is incredibly awkward, and I'm glad you don't have 3. To be elected by the electors of the district, and a secretary to be appointed by the board. So the board decides who the secretary is going to be. Every elector of a district is qualified to be a member of the board or an officer of the district. So as we talked about, in order for you to be on the board, you have to be an elector. If, for example, you were to get on the board because you live here and decide you're going to move over, 10 miles from here, and you're no longer in the district, then you're no longer qualified. Okay. All right. What specific rights do individual board members have? We talk about the board collectively. The power of the board is in the collective. All right. But individual board members, how much authority do they have? Board members can attend meetings and represent voters. Come to meetings, vote on things, interact with your voters. That's the primary responsibility for board members. They can be compensated, and that's in quotes on purpose, up to $50 a day. Do you guys currently give that stipend to your board? No, you can. You don't have to. But just so you know, the board can adopt a policy. Within ORS Chapter 198, there's a statute that says that board members are entitled to collect up to $50 per day of service to the board, or words to that effect. And you can be reimbursed for expenses. And that is specifically there to ensure for 2 reasons. One is to make sure that you are not, people can't come and say that you are violating your ethics obligations. If you are receiving compensation, like if you're getting anything of value, that's an ethics violation in many cases. However, the statute is specific that it's not, that you're entitled to that under statute. The other thing that it does is every elected official, every special district elected official can serve on any number of local boards as long as no more than one of them is for compensation. Now, I don't know, there's not a single special district in Oregon where the board members are compensated for anything. But if in theory, let's say you are a metro committee of some kind where they paid their members, you could do that and still be on any number of special districts, but you can't be on more than one if you're getting paid for it. Okay, so what the statute says is that that's not considered remuneration. That would disqualify you. So you could be on this board, receive up to $50 per meeting, get your expenses reimbursed, but that doesn't count as, that would disqualify you from serving on other boards. It's not considered remuneration in that context.
So I recently discovered that here in town, the fire board gets paid. So could they apply for our board?
Well, when you say getting
They
paid,
get that.
they get that little stipend.
I just did the math. It says they get $600 a year, so if you take 50 times 12 meetings,
I see, 50
$600.
per meeting, okay. That is, assuming that this is what they're talking about, and it sounds like it, they can still be on other boards.
Okay.
That's fine. If they were actually being compensated, like they're getting a 1090, getting a W-2, where it counts as compensation, then no, they can serve on one board and get paid, and they can serve on any other boards and not get paid, but they can only serve on one that pays them, or pays them anything other than this stipend, okay? All right, and I don't know how many boards you guys are on. It's not uncommon, especially in small communities, for the same people to be on the school board and the water district board and the park and recreation district board, and good for you, because those boards need you, and there's nothing to prevent you from being on as many as you feel like you could do. But if you're getting paid for any one of them, you can only do one that you get paid for. Individual board members are entitled to indemnity under the Oregon Tort Claims Act for claims of negligence against the board. We're going to elaborate in a minute on the coverage of the Oregon Tort Claims Act, but individual board members are entitled to those protections. Individual board members can engage in campaigns. Ordinarily, if there was a campaign, if there was something on the ballot, like either somebody running for election or a bond measure or something that you guys have put on the ballot, once it's on the ballot, no public funds can be used to promote that thing. Meaning that the employees cannot do that, cannot advocate for anything related to that ballot measure. That's prohibited by law. And board members, no district funds could be used to advocate. So you can't prepare district funds to say, get out and vote for our bond measure. You can't use public money for that kind of thing, all right? The difference is that the elected officials are the politicians, if you will. So there is nothing to prevent elected board members from going out and advocating your hearts out, advocate for fellow board members, advocate for bond measures, advocate for elected anything, that's okay. However, you just can't use district funds to do it, and you can't engage district staff to do it because they're being paid with public money, okay? But you are the politicians, whether you like it or not. You have the ability to do that. Individual board members are legally obligated to exercise fiduciary duties on behalf of the board. And this would be true even if you were on the board of directors for Intel or any board that represents an entity has fiduciary obligations to act in the best interest of that entity. And those include duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, and you have to act within the course and scope of the duties that are assigned to a board member. When we talk about duty of care, that includes giving the same care and concern to the board responsibilities as any prudent and ordinary person would. Actively participate in board meetings and on committees. Don't get elected and just not show up, or get elected and sit there and say nothing. That isn't what you're being elected to do. Actively work with other board members to advance the district's mission and goals. Again, the power of the board is in the collective. It doesn't mean you have to agree on everything, but the majority decides. Okay, so the idea of being on board member is you work in good faith. You don't have to, you might lose the vote sometimes, you might disagree with other board members, but if the majority decides on a direction, that's the direction, okay? Duty of loyalty means you place the interests of the district ahead of your own interests at all times. There's a whole body, we're going to get into that today, but there's a bunch of ethics laws that apply where you can't line your own pockets by virtue of being a public official. That's true for staff and elected officials. And that's kind of, you shouldn't be on the board in order to get rich. You also shouldn't be president in order to get rich, but just so you know. You have to publicly disclose conflicts of interest and not use the board service as a means for personal or commercial gain. The ethics laws are designed to ensure that that doesn't happen or to punish people where that does happen. You have a duty of obedience. The board must make sure the district is abiding by all applicable laws and regulations and doesn't engage in illegal or unauthorized activities. So again, it's the board's responsibility to ensure the district is operating legally. All right, if somebody were to bring a lawsuit against the district, again, the board is going to be named in that because you guys are the ones who are responsible for ensuring that the laws are followed. Okay. You are required to carry out the district's mission in accordance with its statutory authority and adopted policy. So we talked about the statutory authority that's there for you and tells you what you can do. If the statutes don't allow you to do it, you probably can't do it. Or if you're thinking about doing it, talk to your lawyer first to make sure that you're going to be able to do it legally. And then once the board adopts a policy, you're required to follow your policies. There's a whole separate cause of action legally if the board does something in violation of its own policies. Okay, so you should be aware of what the policies are and what they say, but you also, as a board, have the authority to change the policy if it isn't working. Okay, acting within the course and scope. We're going to elaborate on this a little bit and what that means. You are allowed to exercise only the authority granted by law or board policy. Engaging in activities permitted directly by statute within the role of the member of the governing body or delegated by the rest of the governing body. Why does that matter? If you're acting outside your course and scope, you're doing things that are not authorized. You've kind of decided that you know best and you go do your thing. And it could be there's no statutory authority for you to be doing that. There also might not be any board authority for you to do that. What we're trying to do is keep people from going off and promoting their own agendas without the rest of the board behind them. You cannot interfere with the district's contractual relationships. If the district has an agreement with somebody, it is a violation of your fiduciary obligations to go and try to undermine that or, you know, interfere with the contractual obligation. All right, I'm going to elaborate a little bit on some of this. This is an opportunity for you. Don't look ahead, they're cheating. Individual board members have the power to engage in the following tasks without the consent of the rest of the board. Choose all that apply. You can attend board meetings by telephone. You can establish policies. You can review personnel records. You can direct staff, and you can sign contracts. What do you think?
A, B, and C.
I'm just gonna say
A, feel good about A, and you said B, Kim, establish policies. Isn't
And
every
D.
A and E?
A and D. I just think C and D are the ones that should be
all the
there.
rest of the board.
This is remember it's individual board members.
Oh, individual, okay, so not B and not E. So A, Jeremy's probably right.
A, anybody have a different response to that? If you do, you're not saying it out loud. Let me just end the suspense. And you were correct. Okay, individual board members, this is your the authority that you are allowed under the law. All right, specifically. Individual board members, you are elected to attend meetings, participate in the meetings. You can do it by the telephone is a bit of a red herring there. It's okay to attend a meeting by telephone as long as everybody can hear you. But the idea is you can attend meetings. That's what you're elected to do. All right, and you can speak and you can vote. But the rest of this stuff, to Kim's point, is a group thing. All right, no individual board member can establish policy or enforce a policy. No individual board member can review personnel records. It is not uncommon in my experience. Again, I represent a bunch of districts. I've been doing this a long time. It's not unusual, I find, for board members, particularly some who get on the board for this purpose, where they're sure there's something going on. I'm getting to the bottom. They might be right, but they come onto the board for an agenda, and in many cases, they will go to the staff and say, "I'm on the board now. I'm entitled to see all the records that I want to see." Not true. All right. If a board member wants to see public records of any kind, they need the board collectively to authorize them to go look at those records. If the board has not authorized it, then that board member is acting as a citizen. All right, and you have the same rights as any citizen does to see public records, including if it's a confidential record,
even if it's like an employee policy or personnel record, that is confidential. In public records, do not disclose it, or you can keep it confidential. So any individual board member does not have the authority to see it. All right, acting on your own. So, okay, reviewing personnel records or any other kind of record is not, board members can ask, but you have to follow the public records laws or policies of the district in order to see those. And then directing staff, as we talked about, the way this is supposed to work is the board supervises the executive then supervises everybody else, right? And they're supposed to work within the budget, et cetera. There is, it is not uncommon in my experience for board members to go, and a lot of this is, you know, I'm on the board now and you staff have to do what I say, all right? That can get very demoralizing to staff. It also sets you up for potential legal issues, all right? The board does supervise the executive, and the idea is if the executive is not doing what you want the executive to do, then you have evaluations and you have discipline, et cetera. The board can do that. But the board should not, under ordinary circumstances, be going around the executive with the staff, all right? Now, with that said, if the staff is doing something that in the board's view is not okay, then you need to have words with your executive director, because that person is responsible for everybody else, all right? And if the executive director is not listening to you or not following the instructions of the board, that is subject them to discipline, okay? The board can decide whether or not that's a performance standard and whether or not that person's meeting that performance standard, but that responsibility falls to the board to do. What you should not be doing, however, is micromanaging, which is deciding for yourself and then who's going into any particular facility of the district and doing that kind of, I'm on the board and I demand that you do this for me. That's micromanagement. You don't have the authority to do that. However, if the board thinks that's necessary, the board can delegate, can vote to say, okay, we're gonna authorize Darla to go and look into this matter and come back and report to us. They can do that, okay, but it has to be done in a formal way. It needs to be reflected by a vote in the minutes, okay? All right. In signing contracts, no individual board member has the authority to bind the district legally to a contract. And if you decided that you did, once in a while, it doesn't happen often, once in a while, I've had board members who kind of are out in the community and they think it'd be a really good idea for the district to buy this backhoe. That's a great deal. We're going to buy that. Or let me tell the backhoe person we can follow this from you, and we're going to give you this much money. That's an unauthorized contract unless the board has to. So if you were to go out and bind the claim that you are entitled to bind the district legally and you're not, then that's your problem. All right, you could be expose yourself to breach of contract because you didn't have the authority to do that.
I have a question now.
Yeah.
So let's say the person feels like need the background. They go out and they find one and they don't bind the district to bind it, but they say, look, we would really like if you could hold this for us while we go ask permission. Then they go to the board and say, they pitch their case.
Probably fine. Yeah, you haven't obligated. I mean, the tricky part there is there's the potential for the person to go like, oh, well, we have an oral agreement that you're going to buy this. We just need to get it signed up. Legally speaking, it probably wouldn't fly for them to claim that, but you just have to be careful what you say. I mean, if your explanation is, I don't know if the board will approve it, but can you just give us a week? That's perfectly fine to do that. Okay, does that help? Okay. Any other questions about any of this? I know I'm moving pretty quickly, but that's partly by design because we have a lot to get through and I want to make sure you don't fall asleep on me. I don't know about you, but it's a long night. Okay, so those are the authorities of the district. We talked about the district as a municipal entity, the decision-making authority of the board in the collective, the governing body, which is what you are. And then we talked about what individual authorities board members have or don't have. Okay, so this is all about who's in charge and who has the authority to do what. All right. So the next step is let's say the board wants to make decisions. How does the board appropriately do that? And some of this will be reviewed for you. You've been around for a while, you know this. But particularly for anyone who's new, it might be helpful to see this. Any board action
to be binding must be at a properly called public meeting, what you have here. If you're sending, we'll touch a little bit on the requirements of public meetings law, but essentially you need to put out the difference between a legal public meeting and an illegal public meeting is notice. All right. So you've sent out your notice, you've properly called your public meeting, requires a quorum to be present. What's a quorum?
Majority of board.
Majority. All right. So for you guys, what's quorum? 3. Very good. All right. And that means a quorum must be present in order for you to transact business at any time. All right. So in your case, let's say now you have a vacancy. Let's say that we have a 5-member board and 3 of you are quorum, so 3 of you attend the meeting. And something comes up and you want to vote on it. You have the ability to go forward with the meeting, right? Because you have quorum. Okay to have the meeting. But let's say you go to call a vote of those 3, and 2 vote yes and 1 votes no. Does it pass? Because, and this is where vacancies can get tricky. In order for anything to pass, it's going to require a majority of the board to vote on it, and that is measured by the number of positions on your board. So for even if you have vacancies, okay. So the idea is if you have a 5-member board, you need 3 votes at least for something to pass. Regardless, yeah. So the vacancies can be a little tricky because you may end up in a 2-2 problem, which is what I was saying earlier, where, you know, if you really want to advance your agenda, it might be nice to have 3 people voting on something, because 2 to 2 doesn't pass either. All right. Okay. That makes sense? Okay, quorum to be present. And again, generally requires approval by a majority of the board. That's what we just talked about. All votes have to be taken publicly. No secret ballot. Both you as an elected official are accountable to the public for your vote. It should be reflected in the minutes. Everybody who wants to know should know how you voted on something. Abstentions should be used very sparingly, but you can't vote in private. You cannot vote in an executive session. You also can't vote by secret ballot. And sometimes the temptation, I've had clients ask this because they, let's say, for example, they're going to fill a board vacancy. And they're members of the community and you know them. Some of you like this person and some of you don't like this person, and you want the ability to speak freely about that. And can we just do it? No, you can't. Same with budget. Do the same kind of thing. Or could we just, you know, put an anonymous vote in a hat? No. All right. Unfortunately, you, well, fortunately or unfortunately, you're accountable for it if you're going to be filling a public position. All right. Regular vote. Okay, they're essentially 3 little buckets that your decision-making processes are going to fall in. The first one is the one you use every day. We're just calling those regular voting procedures, where they're day-to-day operations. They don't really rise to the level of policy, like voting to approve their minutes, you know, voting to approve their checks this month, or, you know, that kind of housekeeping stuff. Whether or not you're going to go to the SDAO training in August, September, which I'm keeping you should go. So those are kind of routine day-to-day stuff. That's just a vote. You take a vote, get recorded in the minutes, and then you don't have to document it in any other formal way. Okay. Just, yeah. And by the way, just so you know, the meeting minutes are the permanent records of the district of what happened at the meeting. Permanent. The district has to keep them forever. All right, and not all public records is that true. So the idea is that you want your minutes to reflect what actually happened. And those can be hugely helpful, particularly like in my case, sometimes somebody will come and say, well, we're being sued for something the board did. And a lot of times my first request is, can you show me a copy of the minutes? Because I want documentation of what actually happened. So minutes are very important. Don't take them lightly. They should reflect what actually happened. But other than that, if it's reflected in the minutes and it's just regular stuff, that's all you really need to do. Something that bumps up to the policy level, which is it's kind of beyond day-to-day operations. It has more to do with how we as a district are going to move forward. Public records policies, employee policies, public contracting policies. Those all govern internal operations, but they basically set the rules of the road for how we're going to operate internally. All right, those are policies. Those are set by the board, and the best way to set them up is by resolution, which basically is just a way of sort of communicating this is formal.
It's a policy decision. And your resolution, there's no particular magic to it. I prepare them all the time, but you see them. It's kind of like, resolution number whatever. Whereas, all this context about why we're doing this, the board hereby resolves as follows. The employee manual as revised is hereby adopted. That kind of thing, all right? So basically what it is a more formal way of documenting the board's major decision, okay? So there should be many districts have like a resolution book or something where anybody can go look them up. Now these the board can change, all right? If you have a resolution, a policy that you've adopted, you can change it by resolution if a majority agrees, okay? You're not, you don't ever have to worry that you're gonna, you can always change those.
And they don't ever expire until you make a new one, right?
Basically, unless the resolution gives it an expiration date, they're kind of in place until you change it. Yeah.
How do you know when, I mean, sometimes we don't know, do we need to do resolution for this, or can it just be in minutes?
That's a good question. And there's a little bit of discretion associated with that. First, you can always ask. It really comes down to, is the board's intention to establish an overarching way of doing business, all right? Internally, these are the rules we're gonna follow when someone sends in a public records request, all right? That's not something the board is deciding on a day-to-day basis. You can have a policy that says everybody can be treated the same way. So it really kind of comes down to what your objective is. There are some cases, and some of you will probably know this off the top of your head, where the statutes require you to do by resolution. What's a recent example of that? You know?
Well, adopted the budget.
Bingo. And the statute says there must be a resolution. Okay, in that case, that's a tip, that it needs to look like a resolution.
We decided to change from meeting at the pool, because the room was getting smaller and smaller, to meeting here.
Mhm.
Did that need a resolution? We did a resolution, but I'm curious if it could have fallen in either space.
In that case, I would recommend that it be a resolution, because
Okay.
that's kind of a big deal. I mean,
Okay.
it's not your routine, do we pay the bills this month or
Right,
not?
yeah.
It changes the way that the board is gonna operate, and it's important to communicate to the public. We thought about it, we voted on it, and we have now formally decided this. And you might see a similar sort of process for, many districts do kind of an annual housekeeping resolution where you have like, our registered agent is gonna be this person, our banks are gonna be these people. And those are sort of, because you intend to them to be sort of a formal, adopt formal guidelines for how you're gonna operate, those would likely be done by resolution.
So at the meeting on Monday, Darla, opened a conversation about changing banks.
Yes.
And I know we had a big thing in your resolution, but should we decide that collectively that we're gonna make the change to the bank, that would be a resolution?
I would recommend that it be, yes, that it be done by resolution. And the idea is, first of all, you can have a resolution framed. But because it's a little bit more complicated than just voting on something, you probably don't have to do it all the time. But I would say if this is a decision that is going to sort of change the playing field in any way, you want, and one of the things too is when you go to the bank, a lot of times they'll want to see a resolution, right? If the board formally decide to do this, and that's usually done by resolution, so they will look for that. But in that case, because you're kind of making a significant operational change, even if it's just one way, I would recommend doing it by resolution. It doesn't have to be 25 pages. I mean, but the resolution can be up 2 paragraphs, but I would recommend that it look like the board thought about it, that you're taking it seriously, and that you voted on it. And again, there is a bit of a judgment call in there, like how important does this feel? All right. And another way to think about it is it's something that you think future boards would be bound by. If it's just a day-to-day operational thing, this is your board deciding things, approving things, but it's not going to bind anybody in the future, it's just getting us through today, right? If you're looking at something that's going to be a policy where future boards are going to be subject to it, it probably rises to the level of resolution. With that, having said that, future boards can always adopt a different resolution, that's within their authority, but if the intention is this is gonna carry the day even after we're gone, it probably would be a resolution type of thing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned, there's some sort of like a overarching housekeeping resolution yearly or every other year, is that just a? Basically, so the board always reviews their current resolutions and keeps them up to date, even if they've already done it in the past, just review the same one?
Yeah, again, it's one of those things, depending on how, it isn't a legal requirement by any means. It's kind of the housekeeping resolution where you're basically affirming, yes, these will be our banks. Yes, this will be our, these will be our, this is where we're gonna meet. Okay, yes, this will be our meeting time. Those kinds of things that are kind of like, this is how the board's gonna operate. It's not a bad idea to do it for some sort of sleepier district where nothing ever changes. I mean, why would you need to change it? I don't think it's necessary, but it kind of looks good. It kind of it reminds the board of kind of these are things that are your decision to make, and maybe you should pay attention to them. But again, there is unless the statute says that something must be done by resolution, it's not a legal requirement that it's be done by resolution, but it can help you not only operationally, but also to convey if anybody asks. Because let's say, for example, you're going to have somebody suing you because you did something wrong, right? Yes, I've never seen this happen. Let's say a bank sues you and says you didn't properly authorize changing banks, so you will need money, something like that. The way that you would defend yourself is a resolution that shows, no, we thought about it, we voted on it, here we go. That is they're a real quick way to convey to anyone who wants to know that the board gave this some thought and decided it. All right, it creates a really nice paper trail in the event that you need somebody asks you to prove that did you even give this any thought? Why are you being so arbitrary? You're like, well, we're not. We have a resolution. So there you go.
So if you have that housekeeping resolution, does it replace? Do you take the content of the resolution and add it to the new one, or you just refer to like a table of contents?
Well, there's some, I would say my feeling is don't overcomplicate it if you don't have to. If you have something that lists all that stuff, and this is how this is what we're gonna meet, this is the time we're gonna meet, this is all, these will be our banks, and nothing's changing. Essentially, what you do is just reaffirm that resolution. It doesn't have to replace it. The only time you'd want to probably do a new one is if you're going to change them. Right.
Well, that's kind of an issue. It's, we're 25 years in. Does anybody know what happened in the third year? If it's still we are trying to figure out, is there already something we're not following?
Yes.
So, and to your point, so when we did the resolution to change to here, was the first time we had seen the previous resolution. And the previous resolution said that we would meet at 7, and we've been meeting at 6.
Okay.
So not a huge significant thing, but
If we do a resolution to change the times.
if we did in between, I never saw that. It might have
It
been
might have
about,
just been in the minutes.
Part of this too as well, especially in operation for a while, is there's a great accumulation of papers, right? And now they're electronic. So it would not be any board member or any member of the public for that matter should be able to either find whatever your applicable resolutions are or figure out how to get them. All right. And that's true for board members. If somebody says, don't worry about it, board, you don't have to care, that's the wrong thing for them to be saying to you, because you do have to care, because that is your job to know what are our policies. And how do you know when to change them if you don't know what they are? Right. And there are times when I've had similar boards who are kind of like, oh, we don't even know, nobody's been doing this formally ever. Sometimes what I will recommend is, well, start now. Adopt a resolution that basically replaces whatever happened before. This is how we're going to do it. All right. So again, you're creating a paper trail. There are very organized districts I find where you can go back and see the resolutions from 1957. Those are rare. But, at least within the last 10 or 15 years, you should probably be able to have what policies you're supposed to be following. Okay. All right. And then the third thing, we won't spend a lot of time on it. This is about resolutions. We talked about all that. Let's skip that. Ordinances, that's the most formal thing the board does. And those are local laws. So constitutionally speaking, there are certain procedures that have to happen. There's specific, the ORS chapter 198 spells out all the hoops you have to jump through to adopt an ordinance. And it involves, you actually have to publish notice in the newspaper. You have to have a hearing. There's all this kind of stuff that has to happen. We're not going to elaborate on that because it's a rabbit hole that with more minutia than we want to get into. But be aware that because it was a law that you're going to be enforcing people, and because you can adopt laws that penalize people for violating them, you need to be clear that you have done the proper procedures so that you aren't improperly accusing people of violating things when their life law is not in your ordinance. Well, it should be. Okay, so this is the decision making. You were going to ask a question that's really board decision making. I think you emailed me about.
We had briefly talked about how the motion process should work, right? Because currently, the way that I've learned from being on the board is that we all just have a discussion and then someone makes a motion and then we vote on the motion. And so from watching training and understanding, it looks like you're supposed to make a motion, someone seconds it, and that's to have the discussion. And then you can call a vote on the motion that was originally made. And then if it doesn't pass, you say the motion is defeated. But we haven't been doing it like that. And we did that on Monday, and it was a bit of caused confusion. So we tried to do it properly, and it caused confusion. So I was just curious if there is a good way for us to learn. Maybe watching other boards that are good at doing this.
First of all, that's almost always when I see, around the state, there's almost always somebody who says, do we have to follow Robert's rules of order? And the fact is, no, we don't. They're helpful. And if you've ever read Robert's rules of order, most of that stuff you don't. If that is becoming an issue, or you want sort of a clearer template for how you want to do that, my suggestion would be decide amongst yourselves. Legally speaking, ideally, you should have a meeting and you should have a second. And then ordinarily it would be, I move that we do this thing we just talked about. And then somebody says, I second. And then the board chair would say, is there any further discussion? And this is the time if you have objections or support, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then once the discussion is done, then it's like you call for the vote. And then however you vote, you vote. And that's really all for the procedure that you really need to have. You can make it as complicated as you want to. I don't recommend it because it is, to your point, it confuses people. I was on a committee for a while. What do they call the Sunshine Committee? I don't know if that means anything to you. The public, there was a legislative decision several years ago that they needed to create a committee to review all of the exemptions to public records. And there are over 500 exemptions. Public records, and they created this little committee whose job it was to review them all and make recommendations to the legislative committee, things that could be changed or streamlined or whatever. And as seems to happen every time I volunteer for anything, I just decide you should be our board chair. I'm like, oh, lovely, unpaid time. And I sort of tried. They were very loosey-goosey. They're like, what do you guys think? You like this idea? Okay, let's do it. I mean, and it was probably fine, nobody cared. And the minutes reflected, we generally agreed on this. So someone who teaches this stuff, I wanted it to be a little more formal than that. So I would say, would someone like to make a motion? They look at me like, you aren't going to make us do that, are you? So just any formality at all got me nowhere. So I had to kind of default to, well, did we make a decision and could we look at the minutes and know what the decision was? Was about the best I could do. But frankly, some level of formality, and especially if we do it at the same time, and it's sort of a heavy responsibility on the part of the board chair, but it just kind of, I would say, just set yourself, and the board can do this collectively. Do we all agree that we need a little more formality, and how about this? And it could be in 3 steps, a motion, a second. And then there is the, if it doesn't get defeated, it dies. And that is kind of the impact of that. But the fact of the matter is, if it doesn't get seconded, it wouldn't be approved anyway. So I know I'm being really pilly-mouthed about this, but the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter that much. Set up a procedure that works for you. Ultimately, it should be clear from the minutes that the board voted on something and what that was. And how you get there is kind of up to you.
I can appreciate the desire to make it a little bit more. I have the same discomfort. I'm like, this is kind of mushy, you guys. Shouldn't we be a little more formal? But I was basically booed out of the room for trying to do that. So, okay, what if board members don't properly carry out their duties? If you are acting outside the course and scope, and those are words of art, terms of art, because they're relevant to your liability, you can be held personally liable. So if a board member is going off and doing their own thing, I've decided on behalf of the board that I'm going to go and punch that guy because he's, using our pool wrong or something like that. Or I've decided that I'm going to go portray somebody in a negative light because, I think it would be better, if you're kind of off doing your own thing and the board hasn't approved it, you're acting outside the course and scope, or you're doing something that like a park and recreation district should not be doing. Like I'm gonna go and start operating my own sewer plant here on park property or something like that. These are ridiculous examples, I know. But the idea is, if you're acting outside your course and scope, you lose the protection of the Oregon Tort Claims Act. I'm going to elaborate on that in a minute. So keep that in mind. You want to be sure that you're acting within the course and scope of the duties of a board member. Individual board members can be found personally liable for repayment of unlawful expenditure of public funds. So if your budget is not properly adopted, if you are approving expenditures that are not properly budgeted, if you are approving expenditures that are for things that you're not authorized to do with those monies, like the park and recreation districts aren't allowed to spend money on a horse farm or whatever it is that you've decided to do. Those are unlawful expenditures of public funds. And under the local budget law, the liability for doing that wrong is individual to the board member, meaning there's no protections for you. The district doesn't protect you. Your insurance doesn't protect you. The district's insurance. You're not covered by the Oregon Tort Claims Act. Essentially, that's whatever penalties there are coming out of your pocket, you personally. So if the board collectively does it, each of you is personally liable. If a majority does it wrong, each of them is personally liable. So if somebody were to come back and say, you guys are spending money contrary to law, it wouldn't be just the board who would be named in that lawsuit. It would be the individual board members by name, because under this statute, it's personal liability. And you could be held, if they find that you did that, you can be required to not only pay back what it is that you improperly expended, but also additionally that amount again is penalty. All right, so potentially, just be aware. And I can tell you that in Oregon, the Oregon cares, and I say Oregon collectively because it's been historically true, and you'll see it in the legislation. Oregon cares very much about two things as far as public entities are concerned. Transparency, which is we're going to be as public as possible. When in doubt, try to be public unless you have specific authority not to be. The second one is, are you properly managing public money? Right, these are the public's funds. All right, the taxes that you collect, the fees that you collect are considered public money. And so the idea is there's a lot of sort of checks and balances to make sure that elected officials can't spend public money wrong. All right, or in a way that benefits you personally. All right, so when in doubt, err toward transparency if you can, and make sure that you are very, very careful with money. Okay, and when I say careful, I mean have a paper trail, because if somebody comes and says you're improperly spending money and you can't prove what your budget says, or that you properly approved your budget, or that your expenditure, that you know what's being spent, the board is responsible for ensuring that the public funds are being spent correctly. Yeah.
You said the board knows it's being spent. So if we delegate any kind of spending to an employee and the employee made a mistake, that would come back on us personally.
It could. And the idea being that, let's say, and it's perfectly legit, by the way, you often see this in public contracting rules, that you're going to delegate certain spending authority to like the executive director, or if you have a purchasing manager or something like that, they're given some sort of limited, you can approve contracts up to $10,000 without the board's approval, and the assumption being that provided it's properly budgeted. All right. And that's perfectly okay to do that. However, the board has to have an oversight role of some kind. Because what will happen is if the staff is off spending money, and you can't access
the funds, you can't access the budget, you don't know where you are budgetarily. Ideally, the board should be getting at least monthly updates on here's where we are, here's the money that was spent. And I can tell you that the board is supposed to know that, and even if you didn't know that, and somebody were to come and say, these monies are being improperly expended, or you've exceeded your budget, or something, and the board, it is not an excuse to say, well, how could we know? Because the fact is, the board has to find a way to know. And if that entails some sort of, part of the performance evaluation of your executive director is, this is a performance expectation. And if you cannot deliver on this, then there is the potential that we could discipline you for that. So it's a very important performance measure. So the board claiming that it's beyond your control and you have no way to know. Unfortunately, it may be true, but it doesn't get you off the hook either.
So the board can see the bank account, can see the financials. They say, Taylor, you can spend this much money, who counts, it's in our budget and it's okay. They're signing checks that go to, and that's all the.
That's all fine, as long as, but it's kind of incumbent on the board to know what are you signing. Right, you don't have to be, I mean, I know some board members who are so incredibly, what's the word I want to say, granular in terms of what they demand to know, but the staff is like, really? But with that said, there is a balance there where you gotta know, how much money is in this account, where's this coming from, what's it for? Okay, fine, I'll sign that check. But if you're signing the check and you have no idea what it's for, you don't get to say, well, how was I supposed to know? That's not my problem, because it is. All right.
In that specific example, aren't the people who actually sign the check the ones who are spending money, as opposed to the staff in that case?
Yes, yes, if certainly the ones who are signing the check have the most culpability there if it's not done correctly. But the rest of the board, if they're fine with that, and they're like, when you go and sign whatever you need to sign, we don't need to know, that doesn't get the rest of the board off the hook either. Because the potential there is any individual board member could be like, well, if you're not gonna check.
I guess my point was, it would not be the staff spending money at that point. Once there's other signatures on that check, it's still on the staff spending money now for the individual.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's always why it's a very, you will always have to have at least, you and usually two board members who are signing off on things, because the board ultimately is responsible, okay, for that. Okay, so that, be aware that that's potential legal exposure. All right, that's your fiduciary obligation, is to know what are we doing with public money. Oh, and you can't personally, the ethics laws prohibit you from lining your own pockets by virtue of your position on the board, and that includes, hey, Kim, you're on the board. How about we give you this free meal at Applebee's? Even how about if we give you, there are some de minimis things there, but the idea being that you can't either obtain a financial gain or forego a financial detriment, getting something for free that other people don't get for free just because you're a public official. That applies to staff as well. Okay, so there is potential for an ethics violation. So when in doubt, ask for advice. If you're found to have violated public meetings laws, including executive sessions requirements, as you probably are aware by now, as of a little over a year ago, the public meetings laws are now being enforced by the Ethics Commission. They have been enforcing executive session laws for quite some time, but now everything is under the Ethics Commission, which I can tell you is creating all kinds of issues. But be aware that if you're not following public meetings law, historically it was a lawsuit. You just take you to court and argue about it. Now you have to go through the whole ethics complaint process most of the time. So be aware, it's an ethics violation if you don't know what the public meetings law says. The district and the board can be liable for employment claims. So if somebody comes and sues sues the district, and there was some component where the board knew or should have known of the problem and didn't, the board individual or the board collectively can be found liable for employment. So primarily for the board, the concern is whatever's going on at the executive level. Most of the time, the board isn't going to be sued for problems that are happening beneath that. However, if you become aware of sexual harassment, some employee comes to you, for example, my supervisor is doing something about this. I'm being sexually harassed, or I'm being discriminated against based on my gender or whatever the reason is. And you don't do it, it's coming upon you. Is if somebody comes to you and says that's happening, and then ultimately brings a lawsuit and you didn't even try to find out what's going on, then the board can be held liable for that. Okay, the standard is always knew or should have known. Okay. The district can be liable for breach of contract claims. Again, like any other entity, you can sue or be sued for breach of contract. The district can be subject to penalties from regulatory agencies such as OSHA, DEQ, workers' comp, et cetera. Those will always name the board, right? And okay. Are there legal protections available for special districts and boards? At this point, most of the time when I'm teaching new board members, they're like, please tell me that I don't have to, I'm not gonna lose my house. Yes, there are protections there, and they come under the legal theory is sovereign immunity. You don't have to know that, but that's where this is coming from. And sovereign immunity is a legal concept that we brought with us from also here on the Plymouth Rock. And essentially what it says is that your average peasant can't sue the king unless the king says that. All right, the king is immune, sovereign immunity from lawsuits, unless the king has decided whether or not he can sue. All right, so we don't have kings in this country. What we have is governments. And so the idea being that that an individual peasant, your average citizen, cannot sue a government entity except to the extent there is a law that says they can. All right, and for us, for you guys, they can, if somebody wants to sue, there is legislation that talks about how your average citizen can sue the government. All right, you don't have to memorize any of this. We're going to talk about the Tort Claims Act primarily, but there is a statute that says if you want to bring a breach of contract action against the government, or the government wants to bring a breach of contract action against somebody else, they proceed like any other party would. There's no special procedure associated with that. They argue about it like anybody else would. Similarly, for something called quiet title, which means that you own land and they own land, and there's an argument about who owns the land. All right, we need somebody to quiet the title. Meaning we can't decide who owns this piece of property. Similarly, the district would be treated like any other private entity. That doesn't come up very often. The big one that you should be aware of is in tort. Anybody here feel smart enough to tell us what a tort is? Your understanding of this? I didn't know until I went to law school. I couldn't have told you. So I think I had a deal. or tort which in my Wordle that counts because that's like a Mexican version of that. So a tort is in comparison on the criminal. If somebody commits a crime, it's considered a crime against the state. All right, and the state has criminal laws that are enforced by law enforcement folks. All right, and the penalty is usually a fine or some sort of incarceration, etc. So that's criminal law. Civil law, which is what is available for us to sue each other. All right, for the average person to sue, and most of the time those lawsuits are based in tort. And tort is, in order for something to be a tort legally, there are three things that have to exist. One is somebody owed somebody else a duty of some kind, meaning it was your job to keep me safe, or it was your job to do your work competently. It was your job to make sure that my house didn't fall down after you built it. That was what I paid you to do. That's how you portrayed yourself. That was your duty. All right. And then you had a duty, and then you breached the duty, or something's alleging that you did. All right. You owed this to me, and you failed. And as a result, I was damaged in some way, meaning I got hurt, or my family members got hurt, or my property was damaged, or somebody died. And that would not have happened but for the fact that you breached your duty. Okay, that's what has to happen, something to count as a tort. And so in most cases, someone is sued, which means that you did something or failed to do something, and as a result, I was harmed. And most of the time, in a civil lawsuit, we probably all know this just because we've lived for a while, what are most people looking for in a civil lawsuit? Money, primarily. Sometimes there can be injunctive relief, like we want you to do something or stop doing something. Most of the time, they're looking for money. All right. So if somebody wants to sue the government,
they have to do it, and they're gonna do it in tort. There is a specific procedure set out for how one goes about suing the government in tort, and that's coming out of, this is called the Oregon Tort Claims Act. And just real quickly, this is kind of the key parts of it. This is coming right out of the statute. Every public body is subject to action or suit for its torts. Public body here would be the district itself, subject to action or suit for its torts and those of its officers. That would be the board, employees. We know what employees are, and agents, which would be somebody purporting to represent the district, acting within the course and scope of their employment or duties. Then the sole cause of action for any tort of those people shall be an action against the public body only. So if you are acting within the course and scope of your duties, even if you do it badly, all right, this was my job, I messed up, sorry, somebody got hurt, you're still acting within the course and scope. There was just something went wrong and somebody was harmed in some way, so the district is being sued. If that's the case, and whoever it is who's being sued, including the board, can show I was acting within the course and scope, maybe I messed up, but I still was trying, then you have the protections of the Tort Claims Act, which basically says in that situation, somebody's going to sue the district, right? I fell down at your pool, all right, and I was harmed by that. And I'm going to claim in my lawsuit that it's the staff's fault for not supervising properly. It's maintenance people's fault for leaving something there that I tripped over. It is the board's fault for not making sure that this was safe, and they're going to name everybody they can think of, all right? And what's going to happen at that point is, you know, the lawyers are going to look, or your insurance company, mostly the insurance company's lawyers are going to look at it and say, well, were you acting within the course of scope, and then this is an oversight, all right? You were doing a job, but you didn't do anything specific to hurt anybody. And they find that you're acting within the course and scope. What happens legally speaking is that the district, the public body, the entity, then steps into the shoes of everybody else, indemnifies you, meaning that all those individuals get removed from the lawsuit, and then the lawsuit proceeds against the entity. Okay, that's what your general liability insurance coverage does for you. All right, so you're suing the district. The lawyers argue about who is at fault and whether anybody's entitled to money, but your insurance then would pay out if there's something. All right, but the protections for you guys is that if you're, as long as you're doing your job to the best of your ability, even if you don't do it perfectly, you're trying to learn. We attend training. We haven't learned everything yet, but we're trying. We have minutes to reflect that we're trying. If you can show that you're acting in good faith and trying to act within the course and scope, even if you make a mistake and somebody gets hurt, you have the protections of the Oregon Tort Claims Act, which basically means that you cannot individually be sued. The district will indemnify you. Okay, so that's good news to know, and why I always appreciate any of my clients or anybody else in Oregon who goes to the trouble of being trained. Because the fact that you are at least trying to get the training means we're trying to do it right. Okay, and we're not going to get it all right all the time, but we're trying, and that goes a long way to making sure that you're protected. There also, I don't elaborate on this because it doesn't have anything specific to do with the board, but the Oregon Tort Claims Act also has damage tax, so that rather than bankrupt public entities, there's a maximum amount of money that people can recover if they're going to sue the government. I won't elaborate on that because it's kind of a rabbit hole, but just, you probably have heard of that, but it exists. All right, any questions on that? I left my phone in the car and okay. We're good? Okay. And if there's a point when you need a break, just look desperate and I'll try to pick up on you. Okay. Help. Okay, any questions on that? On the responsibilities and protections of the board and board members? Okay, if you have any, you're keeping them to yourself. So hopefully that means you're so understanding this, you don't have any questions. And by the way, at the very end, if you have questions that you thought of, feel free to raise them. How can a board member be removed? Well, elected board members can be recalled by the public, by vote of the public. But ordinarily, you can't just be removed from office, okay? Somebody can't just tell you you're fired. The rest of the board can't fire you. You can quit, that's okay. I mean, it's not quit, that's one way to leave the board is to quit. But you can't really be removed from office most of the time, except by recall. And occasionally I have people who say that, like board member so-and-so is disruptive, he's mean, he's not working with us, he's out undermining us, how do we get him off the board? And that's a hard question because some board members are problematic, but there's not a whole lot that can be done unless you can either wait it out until they get replaced in an election, or the members of the public can do a recall campaign. Or sometimes you could just talk to them and say, you know, you don't seem to be enjoying this, Joe. Maybe you should quit. And you can ask, and it might work. But that essentially, once you're elected by the people, you are elected by the people. All right. However, you could become ineligible for office, meaning you might have to leave. If you are, and this is coming out of the Constitution, if you are a member of or affiliated with any organization which teaches the doctrine of or advocates the overthrow of the government of the United States by force or violence. That used to be kind of quaint and funny until January 6th. And now I have people calling me saying, can we, so-and-so was there? Like, what do we do? So just so you know, if you're going to overthrow the government, you shouldn't be working for the government. That's kind of the gist of it. If you are convicted of an infamous crime, and again, some of this is sort of flowery because it's old language. An infamous crime is a felony. If you are convicted of a felony, then you become ineligible for office until you have served your time. Once you've served your time, you can still run, but if it happens while you're in office, then you are ineligible to serve. Or any offense involving the violation of the oath of the incumbent while in office. And that's kind of a tricky one in that you're supposed to when you become elected official, you wait for your time and take it to support the constitutions of Oregon and US and blah, 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 and exercise your skills to the best of your ability, yada, yada. So in theory, if somebody were claiming that you were not doing it, they could bring a lawsuit under this requirement and say you violated your oath of office. Tricky how that would go because it's so subjective. But if you refuse or neglect to take the oath of office or to give or renew the official bond of the incumbent, etc., arguably, if you have never taken the oath of office, somebody could claim you're not eligible to serve. Occasionally that comes up, but it's also another thing that's very easy to fix. If you didn't take the oath of office and somebody says you should have, then you take the oath of office. If you refuse to take the oath of office, it's a little bit different issue.
Is that something that, if, let's say we have a board member that does it for 4 years or whatever, then they're reelected, do they have to take the oath of office?
I would recommend yes, because it's a new term. And it's, you know, I don't know how you guys do it here, but I always like to see, like my clients, they make a little ceremony. You know, we have a new board, welcome to the new board members, everybody let's all do this together, you take your oath of office. And just so, for whatever it's worth, and this tends to get some people kind of twisted up in knots, but legally speaking, for an oath to be binding, it must be administered by someone authorized under Oregon law to administer oaths. And in Oregon, that's a judge or a notary. I mean, having said that, some people have, well, we're going to have this local dignitary, the mayor, come and do this, or, you know, whoever. And it's probably fine. It's going to be fine unless somebody challenges it. But just so you know, kind of interesting little fact for you. If you wanted to have a judge or a notary do the oaths. Sometimes I've seen districts do like a little ceremony, you have whoever the dignitary is, but then you sign a written oath in front of a notary. That counts too.
So I don't remember signing.
You did.
In front of the
No, you did your oath and signed it, but not in front of a judge or a notary. But neither did Jeremy or I.
We have one, you guys all do the oath, but we didn't get another. So we
Yeah, it's something to think about. The other option that it can also work is you have your little ceremony for whatever the public ceremony piece of it is, which is kind of fun. Everybody together, let's do this. And then sometimes some board members, you can go to like the county clerk, who is usually a notary, and just have them swear you in separately. It's one of those things, don't lose a lot of sleep over it, because I can tell you that the technical aspects of that are rarely followed. But I looked into that once to see like who can, because there is a statute that says it must be delivered by someone authorized in Oregon to deliver an oath. And I was like, well, who might that be? And then I looked into it and found out that those two are the only ones authorized by law here in this release. How about that? So, you know, now you can just worry you're doing it wrong. But that particular violation is not a,
Right.
and if you were to come to me and say, somebody's saying we didn't do it right, I'd say, well, let's.
That's what I think we're about to, I'm redoing, Julie's coming back from a previous. Are you suggesting we just do the whole board? Couldn't hurt.
Because we're gonna have a new board member too, so if we do it
Oh,
once or I said.
I would
do it
recommend
at-
every time you have a new, newly constituted board.
Yeah. Have everyone.
Not everybody. It's sort of a team building opportunity, but it also communicates to the public, we are a board, we're doing this together. It's nothing wrong with it.
And have a push committee of the reform.
If you have any judge friends,
Sure.
invite them, or whatever, or, you know, or just do it differently. That I gave you.
No reason not to do it.
You can, it's not that hard to do. Okay. If your election or appointment is declared void by a competent tribunal, in this context, it would be probably a court of law, or the Secretary of State might find that, or the county clerk might find that your election was not proper, meaning that you didn't file it properly, you're not eligible to run, you didn't have it anyway, or there was something hinky in the vote count. Then you can have your, if they can prove that, then your appointment is declared void, meaning it didn't happen and you are not on the board. Okay. If you are found to be a mentally diseased person by a competent tribunal is not the rest of the board. Competent tribunal, there are people who are authorized under the state law to determine competency, you know, and most of the time it's like, yeah, so-and-so is mentally diseased, and you might be right. But I have seen occasionally this come up, especially for people who've been on the board forever and they're getting much older and it's clear that they're not quite what they used to be, and the rest of the board is like, but unless that person is sort of certified, the best thing in my experience to do at that point is try to talk to their family see what you need to do about managing this person. And if they're found to be mentally incompetent, they will often resign. But if not, if it ever got that far, they could be removed by virtue of being mentally incompetent, or mentally diseased, which is old language. We wouldn't say that now, but. If you cease to possess any other qualification required for election or appointment to such office, and that the example I gave earlier, if it's requirement to do within the district's jurisdictional boundaries and you move, at that point you're not eligible. By law. Sometimes it takes somebody to remind you of that, but if you're going to be moving out of the district, you probably do before somebody tells you. You can be removed from office if you agree to engage in or do engage in a duel or curry a challenge to a duel to another person. That is in the Oregon Constitution, 1854. Is that when we? Yeah, I think that's right. Anyway, it's in the Oregon Constitution. So I guess if you wanted to get somebody off the board, challenge them to a duel. If they accept, I'd be like, you're off. Sorry, just don't actually shoot anybody. It also doesn't say, I mean, and at that time, I mean, everybody probably pretty much understood what duel meant, but you know, I mean, it's subject to interpretation. So I mean, if you have a super soldier and you go shoot it at somebody, is that a duel? If they shoot back, I don't know. Okay. So this is 5 essentials, in my opinion, for managing risk exposure. All decisions of the board must be made by majority vote at a properly noticed public meeting. All right, that ensures your votes are legal. No individual board member is authorized to speak for or represent the board without the express formal approval of a majority of the board. All right, don't go off on your own. But if you have something you want to do, go talk to the board about it. If the majority says, okay, you can go do that thing, then you probably can do it. The board acting collectively must clearly understand its role as a legislative and policy-making body and remain within this scope at all times. If the board intends to delegate any of its administrative authority by contract or vote, it should clearly understand what authority it's delegating and specifically describe the limitations of the authority it's delegated, but yeah. So sometimes you will see, when I prepare public contracting rules for my clients, there will usually be a delegation thing, which is you're going to delegate some sort of spending authority to somebody, usually the manager, the executive director, but it should be very clear. And that's not only to protect the board legally, but to communicate clearly to that person where the authority starts and ends. All right. And I have found staff members who are just begging the board to be clear. I don't know, I'm scared. Could you please be clear on where?
Delegation, we redelegate, so we give it to the executive director, and then we assign to the member.
You know, that's an interesting question. Probably,
Seems a little.
yeah, I think ultimately, if it's being delegated because I as the executive have a certain amount of approval authority, I think it depends on what it is they're redelegating. Probably it's fine, but I'm going to give you the lawyer's answer. And it depends. Like, I would want to know what it is they're doing and how and what. As long as there's a clear sort of pecking order, or
So, an example might be credit card expenditures. So credit cards being used below the executive director with oversight. I mean, not necessarily even that anything's wrong, but can that be, everybody gets the credit card?
Yes, however,
Well, it's not.
and
It's an example.
and that's one of those things the board should have a policy around that.
Right.
And if you do, fine. And as long as you're following the policy, that should be fine. What the board, this kind of gets us back to the board is ultimately responsible for expenditures. And if people are kind of wrong, spending using the credit card contrary to policy, that can come back and bite. So if it's something to look at and decide, it's usually in employee policies in my experiences. So-and-so shall have a credit card and they're authorized to spend these things and they'll have a spending limit or whatever. In that case, it could be sub-delegated depending on who needs the credit card.
Right.
But yeah, there should be some checks and balances on that.
And so in our current situation with our director being out, Jill's not gonna get in trouble for buying paper today, right?
How many people?
Yeah.
I think that if you are acting in lieu of the executive director, either at the direction of the board or because there's some policy that you are authorized to carry out, you're fine.
I mean, it's in my job description that when the executive director is available, I
You
can.
can step in. As long as you can prove that you have the authority, then spend away. As many paper clips as you
And should we, just since that came up, should we made a motion, passed a resolution saying that Jill is stepping into this role during this time period?
First of all, if there's a policy that says that, then technically you might not need to, but it's not a bad idea to just sort of publicly affirm that. Because that helps her. But it also conveys to the public that we're aware and we're ratifying the policy. I don't think there's any harm. If there's a policy that says that happens automatically and the board has already adopted the policy, then technically I don't think you have to. But there are times when maybe it's a good idea to just have the public conversation.
Right, and because her employment agreement, because she is staff to the executive director, wouldn't have been in the purview of the board, so it wouldn't be a policy.
Okay, so it's an agreement.
Yes.
Yeah, in that case,
Couldn't hurt.
no harm in it and probably some help.
And that would be a resolution.
I don't know that would have to be a resolution because it's temporary.
Right.
Presumably.
So it's a vote.
It might be a vote.
Make sure.
To sort of say, well, we're all aware that our executive director is gone for a period of time and we're going to, officially recognize that Bill is now, in that role until further notice. Well, it's like, good idea to do that. It also communicates to the public that you are on top of this. we thought about it and we've made a decision. And it also helps her know that she's being blessed. Neither the board nor any individual board member should engage in processes or decision-making that are A, delegated elsewhere, or B, outside the scope of the duties of the governing body. And that I would have put in there, micromanaging staff without the authority of the board, things like that. If you think it's necessary, then get the board pulling with you on that. But if it's not necessary, then you're just gonna piss everybody off and make their jobs harder. Okay.
So
All right.
our setup is we would, go to Laura now, Jill, if there was a question or a suggestion. Does that need to be documented? I mean, that's pretty much just our structure.
That's kind of the general understanding. Yeah, the board members. Yeah, well, I would say that I would say it's within the executive director's job description to receive that input from the board.
Right.
And respond directly to board members if necessary. So I think that's the appropriate thing to do. Start there. And if the problem can't be resolved there, then again, the rest of the board may need to get involved and say, hey, this problem is continuing, we should fix it. You know, see what I'm saying?
But does it, okay, that was my question. Do we need to come together as a group before handing the question over, or can individual board members say, hey, I haven't noticed?
In my opinion, it is appropriate and probably healthy that any individual board member could go to the executive director and say, hey, what's going on? Because it could be there's a perfectly understandable, it's something you just don't know. And that in a healthy district, I find that that happens. And then that's the executive director's like, hey, yeah, you're here, let me help you understand that. And they can explain it. And then if you continue to be concerned, or it rises to the level of this problem is ongoing, I'm concerned about it, it may be appropriate to bring it to the entire board and then figure out what do you guys think about this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take everybody's temperature.
Yeah, I would always start, benefit of the doubt. You've hired a person, you hired someone that you believe to be competent, give that person the benefit of the doubt and give them an opportunity to explain themselves or explain how, because board members do what they do and you are responsible, but you're also not in the trenches of it. So there might be a perfectly reasonable explanation for whatever it is, or something you just don't understand. But it is also, in my opinion, if I were counseling the executive director, is don't stonewall. If they're entitled to ask, and if they ask, then respond. And if beyond that, there can be a tendency on the part of staff, and sometimes it's earned, sometimes it's not. There can be a tendency for the staff to basically be very protectionist. Like this is the board, you don't have to worry. Don't worry your pretty demons about it. There's a balance there, because to some extent they're right. The board doesn't have to get involved in the trenches, but on the other hand, it is necessary for the board to know what's going on. And the appropriate person to get that information from is the executive, because that's who you supervise. And if that person is not giving you the information that you feel like you need to know what's going on, how is this being handled, take me on a tour, what I would like the opportunity, then a good executive director recognizes that and will, be like, okay, well, let's see if we can set something up or do that. Right. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have a question? No. Okay. I just want a real quick discussion about conflict. I've used this a few times. I don't know if it's going to be relevant, but it isn't very long. But I guess the question is, essentially, is conflict good or bad? Because every district has its share of conflict. And if you think about it, you've got the public who have opinions about things, because this is their thing and they're paying for it and they enjoy it and they have opinions. And then you have the board who's representing the district, and the public has issues with what the board is doing. And the board has to be responsible for ultimately for staff. And so there's a whole bunch of different relationships in there. So the potential for conflict is there, but there are ways to deal with it constructively and ways not to, and ways that just make things worse. Rarely, if you have the opportunity to go to my website, there's an article on there that's basically like how to deal with, it's something like 10 easy steps for dealing with your lawyer or something like that to save you time and money. And one of the things that is on there, which I run into repeatedly, is don't confuse interpersonal conflict with a legal necessarily. if people aren't getting along, there's sometimes that temptation to be like, well, let's put the lawyer in. And there might be a place for that, but I'm not saying you guys do that, but just so you know, interpersonal conflict is ultimately up to the grown-ups to figure out. All right, it could potentially lead to a legal issue, in which case you might have with the lawyer involved, but conflict is not necessarily bad. Good faith, healthy boards debate things, and sometimes they feel strongly about things. Nothing wrong with that. But if you start throwing things at each other, or work cannot proceed, then you might need to look into how to address the conflict between you. Conflict between board members and staff, not uncommon. Again, sometimes you have board members who overstep when the staff doesn't trust them, or you have staff who don't take the board seriously or treat the board as though they don't matter, which is not right. So again, I've seen it go both ways. In a healthy district, the board knows its job. They know their role as supervisor. The executive understands that these are my bosses and I'm accountable to them. And then the executive then can carry out the responsibility without having to worry that that somebody is coming for them. Okay, and that's a difficult balance to strike. And the question is, when do you ask for help? If you need, and if you're able to resolve it interpersonally, that's the best thing. And sometimes it's just an honest conversation amongst each other. But in the event that there are professional, SCAO has professionals who can help with conflict management stuff. Again, most of the time it doesn't rise to the level of being a legal problem, but your lawyer may be able to give you some guidance on things to do and not to do. And that's just a little side message there in case there's anything in there that's, I guess I just want to acknowledge that it happens and it's hard. And that there isn't always one solution, but ideally you want to give everybody the benefit that we all take this job seriously. Working with the district's lawyer, as I said, what's the role of the district? You don't even need to know this. So this is kind of a self-serving little thing that I throw in here. What's the role of district's legal counsel? My job is to advise the board. Okay, I represent the district. The board is the district. Through the board is my client. All right, I do not represent individual employees. If there's an employment matter, the employees have to get their own lawyer. All right, my job is to advise the board, and that's what I do. No, I don't think you need any of this stuff unless you want to talk about it. Okay, I'm going to skip a lot of that. Okay. Have we collectively agreed we can be here till 8 or 7:30?
I think we figured 8 anyway, which is 2.5 hours.
Yes.
But
Yeah, that was my math.
I'm ready to stay.
If somebody in the back who's feeling strongly that that's too long, and feel free to excuse yourself if you need to. I committed to up to 2.5 hours. I'm almost done. But once we get done with the kind of the final curriculum, we should have a few more minutes if anybody wants to discuss anything or ask some questions or just leave. All right. But feel free. No one will make you stay if you don't want to be here. You're warm too. I'm warm and I'm moving around. It's just more than half hours. Congratulations. It's a good time. I just want to touch on a key point. This is a much longer conversation. You probably are aware that as of recent changes in the law, that every elected official for an entity that has annual expenditures of $1 million or more is required to take public meetings training. And you have to take the one that is blessed by the Ethics Commission. All right. I have been trying to get my materials blessed by the Ethics Commission. It is not going to happen. Right. They are very, 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 very particular on what the materials say. So this is not that. All right. But be aware that in every term, every elected official is required to take training. And if you're a smaller district than that, then it's optional. My training that I do is part of my regional training around the states, and it's just the basics. And it's like, in my opinion, the basic stuff that every district should know, every board should know.
How do you find $1 million for the emergency $1 million that we don't spend it?
Well, the law is expenditures, So depending on how close you are, I wouldn't be too play brinksmanship too much, you know, if we're spending $999,000, then I would say default to having to take it, but that's the standard is expenditures. So there's no harm in taking it if you have to do it once a term. You might learn something. In my opinion, that their sessions are way too long, but bless you. But
So term being 4 years.
each term,
So
if
not-
you're elected again to a new term, you have to take it.
So if yours doesn't pass their muster, how do we find the training for that?
You first start with the Oregon Ethics Commission. I would get on their website because they talk about, they do offer trainings, and my understanding is they don't charge anything for them. I know they did a session at a pre-conference at the SBAO conference in February. I didn't go to that, but I heard it was long. It's 3.5 hours. It's a lot. There, I can also tell you that the Special Districts Association is working on getting their materials approved. They're having the same issue I'm having, or I had before I quit, because I wasn't getting paid for this, is submitting them have to be submitting them rejected. And the granular level of detail that they want in those materials is every statutory site, every regulatory, every administrative rule, every definition. It's kind of pages and pages and pages, which I can tell you that I have been teaching this for a long time. I'm trying to keep my ego out of this, but I'm like, you guys don't need that, but I appreciate that they want it taught correctly. So those materials, SDAO is working on getting their materials approved. They had originally asked me if I would try as well, so we were kind of on parallel tracks for a while. I have given up. I have told them, let me know when you have yours done, and I will be happy to teach your materials, but it's a much longer and more broadly conversation than what we've heard ordinarily.
And you don't think the ethics committee will make that offer, here's finished materials to do training?
That is, thank you, brilliant minds. I made that recommendation after weeks of trying to get materials that they would approve. They not only wanted my materials, they wanted my speaker notes. If you're going to say this, then you have to explain everything that you're going to say. I'm like, really? So anyway, what I suggested, to your point, because they're being so particular about what they want in your materials, that ultimately all the materials are going to be almost identical. You know what I'm saying? Because they say that you can submit materials for their approval and use your own materials, but because they're being so specific about it, they're all going to look more or less the same. So to your point, I said, well, how about what I would consider, maybe you guys should think about, is use your materials and just certify people to teach it. Right. Because the problem they're going to have, which is why SDAO and Leaf Oregon cities and so on are getting involved, is there's a whole bunch of public officials now that have to take it. And that's a lot of people to cover. And so the idea was, we'll farm it out to the professional associations. Well, the professional associations can't get their materials. So to your point, I think it's a brilliant idea. And I said, if you want to certify me or anybody to teach it, we'll just use your materials.
So
And
it's
they said, well, they have material that they use.
And do they charge, you just said it was not charged?
I'm not sure, but my understanding is the ones that are actually taught by the ethics staff, the ethics commission staff, that they don't charge for this. I could be wrong, but I
Well, it
don't
just
think.
seems like that lost 10 minutes, like, because they have to hire.
I think it was legislatively mandated, but I think what they're finding out is it's a bigger job than they thought. I mean, these laws are often passed to deal with people at the state. State people need to follow the law, where they don't realize this is all counties and their cities and their special districts, and special districts are kind of ignored generally. But anyway, I digress.
Until we don't follow the rules.
And yeah, exactly, yeah. So then, this is even more basic than what I would ordinarily do, but I just want to touch on, because it is so important that the board know public meetings law and follow it. Okay, because that's thing one to making sure that you are protected in the event of a legal issue. There's statutory policy, and we talked about the fact that Oregon's big on transparency, very, very big on. I don't know how it is in other states. I don't practice in other states, but I can tell you that transparency is a big deal. The Oregon form of government requires an informed public aware of the deliberations and decisions of governing bodies and the information upon which such decisions are made. It is the intent of the public meetings law that decisions of governing bodies be arrived at openly. So the default is public stuff. The purposes of the law is to open meetings of the governing bodies to the public, to give notice of the time and place of the meetings, and to make them accessible to those wishing to attend. There is no requirement, FYI, in the law that says that the public gets to attend. They do not have the right to speak unless you give it to them. All right, there's nothing in the law that says governing bodies must hear from the public. What the public has the right to do is to attend the meetings and listen. Okay. However, I'm not saying don't listen to the public. What I'm telling the board is you are not legally obligated to do that. And if somebody comes and I have a constitutional right, blah, 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 that's not true. All right. And you find that with people who kind of want to try to control the meeting. They feel strongly that what they have to say is more important. A public meeting of your board is a business meeting. It is a business meeting of the board to conduct the district's business. That is what it is. It is a public meeting because it is open to the public, but it is not a meeting of the public. All right, that's an important distinction for the board to know, because it is not uncommon for members of the public to step in and say, "It's my meeting, and you have to hear from me, and you are wrong, and I'm right, and you have to hear from me." Not true. All right, in order, the board needs to be able to conduct business. It is a good idea. You don't have to do it. It's a good idea to have somewhere in your agenda an opportunity for public comment, but you can stay in control of that process. Okay, you decide how many people get to speak. Give everybody, if there's 5 people who want to speak, they each get whatever, 3 minutes. Everybody gets the same amount of time. I would not engage in debate from the board dais if you can help it. Just hear people. They're entitled to be heard if you give them that opportunity. And manage it. All right. It's important the boards not understand your role is to stay in control of it. Yes.
This board seems to have a form for you to fill out.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay, yeah, but then the question was, can you put on the back and the name you answered on a later date?
That was at the budget.
Oh, I
And
see.
these are our forms, and we let people talk at the meeting, and this is out of our policy. And then this is where they put who they are, and then we have a section in our agenda where we can talk.
Okay.
The only time we didn't do that was at the budget hearing. We asked them to write their questions on the back, and we would get back to them because we were only listening to the questions at the budget.
But how would you come to an answer without having it talked about at the next board meeting?
With the intention that it would come, the questions would be brought to the next board meeting and addressed, or was it?
I think we figured that we would look at the questions. We didn't have any, but we would look at the questions. Myself as the chair or Darla as vice chair, and see if we could answer them. And if not, we could ask another board member or whatever we needed to do to find the answer. Couldn't find the answer, or we needed a collective answer to come to the next.
Okay, and first of all, and this is not a recommendation, so the board is aware that the staff is public aware. The board has no obligation to answer anybody's questions. They don't. All right, there's no, I mean, I'm not saying it's a good idea to not do that. But the point is that, and first of all, the form is a great idea, very common. It's in order to stay in control of how people are going to do. I appreciate Kim's point, but if you're holding, and let me just back up a step. I want to draw a distinction here between a public meeting and a public hearing. Okay, you can have a public hearing anytime. Right? If you want to hear from the public, you can decide to hear from the public anytime you want. There are certain times when you're required to hear from the public, held a hearing, which is your budget. There are other times like you can adopt an ordinance, you have a public hearing. There are certain times when you have to hear from the public. But that a hearing is where you hear. You hear them. Doesn't mean you have to address what they're saying, doesn't have to do anything about it, but you hear them. It's their opportunity to express what they think. All right. There's no obligation on the part of the board to do anything with that information if you don't want to. Now, a good board is receptive to those, concerns and addresses it to the best of their ability, but a hearing is just being heard. And that's what you would do budget hearing was we're gonna take public input. They didn't put time to have a conversation. Now, with that said, if it's the board and board's intention to collect questions and then figure out what to do with them, that's the board's prerogative. I mean, they can do that. I mean, technically, if they don't want to do anything, they wouldn't have to. So,
One of the reasons for how I think about that is I've been to a few of the city council meetings, and the public can ask their question, and then, like Dave mentioned, he has a ward, they take those questions that go to the ward, I believe, and then the counselor who is that, in that area, tries to get back to their person. So I've seen it done like that.
Yeah.
Before.
that's a good idea. Where you're following up individually and not collectively as
Just, do you put that in the minutes? If somebody asks a question, do you have the secretary type up that question and have it as part of the minutes? Or do you just hear it and hear it?
Well, and we do collect the form, but put them with them.
But I mean, like, let's say somebody stands up and they want to know, or they want to make a comment about, I think the water in the pool should be orange instead of blue, and they make their statement. And they listen. And they don't need to respond. Does that go in the minutes, that question? Or that statement?
I
need to change?
Well, I don't know that it's absolutely essential. Part of it is, first of all, if you're getting, a bunch of people sort of saying the same thing, you could sort of collect, generalize, say, several members of the public raised concerns about the color of the water. That's fine. In terms of specific questions, especially if there's only a few of them, I don't think there's any harm in putting it in there. So-and-so raised a question about this, and, the vice chair will follow up on that, whatever. As long as it's kind of an accurate depiction of what, but there's no obligation to put that in the minutes. Kind of depends on how you want it. Yeah.
The other thing we've chatted about is the structure of when public questions are encouraged. A lot of public meetings, they're in the very beginning. So then you have your meeting and maybe someone has a question and that happened, but the next opportunity for their question would be the follow-up meeting.
Yeah.
That's a little awkward. Or probably dissatisfied for the people that are.
Well, and the board can set that up any way you want to. I mean, if you think it would work better to do that, like to put it, we're gonna have, and a lot of districts, a lot of my clients do that. Well, they'll have the agenda, they'll talk about what they're talking about.
Yeah.
We're gonna now open it up for public.
We did move them more towards the end.
Yeah.
That's totally your call, Nick. The order of the business is the board's call.
Mhm.
So if it works better to put it at the end, put it at the end. Or if it's, disruptive, and sometimes in some cases, the board has important stuff to get to. Not that public comment isn't important, but if you have a tight agenda and a lot to cover, sometimes it might make sense. We're gonna open it, we're gonna give you, 15 minutes for public comment at the beginning, and then we're gonna talk about it. So speak now or come back later. Kind of.
Well, it also might give a more thoughtful answer, especially if, like, city council finds out the question and the person gets a more personalized response. Yeah, it might be smarter.
Well, and the other thing too is we give these at the beginning, and they may not know they have a question. And because now they have a question about something we talked about, so they haven't filled out form to get in line to do the question at the end of the meeting. So there are just a few.
Yeah, that actually is a good point for having it in the next meeting, right? Because we can take questions in between also.
Right.
Or you have the form available during the meeting, and if somebody realizes they have a question, they go get the form.
Right.
You can do that.
Yep, and it is.
Okay, sounds like you're managing it. I mean, the
Trying.
question, yeah, well, there is a hard balance, and there is no right way. And you kind of have to work with what works for the board in order to enable you to get your business done, but also be receptive to the public, when they have things to say. What you don't want to do, though, is have the public take over your meeting, because the board is required to sort of make it a business meeting. Okay. Board action must be taken at a properly called public meeting. It requires a quorum to be present. We talked about this. Actually, let's review. We talked about that already. There's some of this stuff that I pulled out of the Ethics Commission is requiring, just because it's kind of relevant to some of this stuff, I just kind of beefed up what I would ordinarily say anyway, but some of the definitions are helpful. What a decision-making body is, that would be your board. They're the ones making decisions. The public meetings law apply to the board as a decision-making body. They also apply to advisory committees or advisory boards. If the board creates a board or committee who's tasked with doing something and then coming and making recommendations to the board or advising the board, they are also subject to public meetings law, so they have to publish notice, etc. The public meetings law does not apply to fact-gathering bodies. So if somebody's job is just to go get the facts and come back with the facts, that they're not required to follow that. Similarly, if the board is going to go on a field trip, like we're going to build a new office and we're all going to go over to that site and look at it and then come back. That's not considered a public meeting at that point. You're just gathering information. It could be if while you're there, you're like, no, let's come on, we're all here. Let's talk about this other thing. That could be a potential problem. But in general, you can collect facts, not a public meeting. Bodies advising individual public officials. I actually have a couple of people who are on boards who have hired me specifically to advise them, which is kind of a trip. But that's not a public meeting. Multi-jurisdictional, some of the stuff isn't going to ever come up. Any meeting where a forum of the governing body of a public body is convening to decide or deliberate toward a matter of business. This has all now been fleshed out in the definitions. On-site inspections don't count. We talked about that. Oh, if you attend members of the body attend a national, regional, or state association conference, etc., that in and of itself is not considered a convening.
So we can all go to the city council meeting.
You could all go to city council meeting, perfectly okay. However, you know the caveat I'm going to give you is if a quorum of you then start talking amongst yourselves about business, you are holding a public meeting, right? Yeah. So going and gathering information, you can all go together. You can go to the same Christmas parties, you can go on vacation. If you like each other well enough to do that, you're doing better than a lot of boards. Yeah, just being together is not enough. But when you start discussing or deliberating towards something of district business, you may inadvertently have created a public meeting, in which case it is improper to continue. However, if you have published notice, which was my recommendation to this meeting, fine, then you can talk about whatever you want, because it's a public meeting that has been properly noticed. Okay.
So I went to ethics training
Yeah.
a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still in Canada. Here were all these districts and a large number of people from the same district sitting there giving examples of things that were happening in the district, getting advice. And I was like, how is that not a forum?
You know, whoever was teaching it might have, who was doing it? Was it George Dunkel?
Yeah. Pretty much the answer I got.
But you know, George and I taught together for many, many years, and George's a little fast and loose with the law.
Yeah,
But
it was
anyway,
interesting, but he tried to keep them very generic examples.
Yeah.
You know,
so hypotheticals.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not happening for us, but
Yeah.
that's pretty common. It's hard to draw.
So we could take a training together, we can
Mhm.
handle it. But your advice, which helped us tonight, is just make it
Yeah,
a vote.
it's not, I mean, my thought too about this kind of training is, first of all, if you make it a public meeting for the board, not only does the board get to get trained, but anybody else who wants to come, staff, public, anybody else who wants to kind of know what you're doing, they can come. And nothing, I don't think anything that we're saying here is harmful. I mean, I think it's beneficial for everybody to know, hear all the same things at the same time. So, and that's where that whole transparency piece comes in. Sometimes I have run into boards who are just determined that nobody needs to know what we're doing. And not only in many cases is that illegal, but it's also counterproductive. You know, I mean, why are you hiding? You know, you're doing important work. And if you're transparent with the public, they will trust you more. Okay, so there's a whole dynamic at play. But anyway, I've been doing this so long that I can get off on all kinds of just different soapboxes that you don't need to hear. Convening, this is kind of an important distinction. This has been in a state of flux for the last few years, particularly following COVID. Gathering in a physical location, this is counts as convening. Using electronic video or telephone technology. So it is still a meeting even if it's not all happening in person. Email meetings are a thing. Telephonic meetings, telephone, virtual meetings, those all count. Those are public meetings. If you're communicating contemporaneously. Similarly, even if you're using serial, they call it serial electronic written communications, which we would ordinarily refer to as email. Those can be public meetings, even if it's not contemporaneous. So be very careful about any sort of group chats that involve a quorum. Using an intermediary. This was the one that we call, what's the term? I'm going to space in the term, so I won't think of it. But the idea is that you're deliberately trying to avoid a meeting by, and basically building consensus, but outside the public earshot. That can be and has been found by court and topic.
Can you email everybody, like, let's say I got a board application and I want to send it. Can I do that?
Absolutely nothing wrong with you sending.
They just can't.
And the fact that your staff, this doesn't apply to you. You can send anything to them. What the board needs to be aware is they can't talk to each other, or at least a quorum.
And I'm sending out like the board packets, and I put informational only, and I put a reminder in the note. If you have questions, please don't reply to all and just ask me individually.
That's why she does. Yeah, and that's a good idea, because it's easy enough to be like, just sort of, you don't think about the fact that you're on a board when you're just reading a group email a lot of times. Question?
Yeah, I have a question now. Actually, another board member, fairly uptight years ago. I was seeking information, so I emailed the entire board. One of them responded. I was like, well, wait, only one of them responded. I didn't know anything about this law at the time. So I then responded to the whole board again, which included that individual response. I obviously was doing it wrong. I was a member of the public trying to create some transparency. How does the board handle that? And their response is suddenly sent to the entire board.
Oh, so you weren't a board
This is a whole different board.
member? Okay.
Okay, you were just a member of the public.
I was a member of the public at the time.
What's the question? Is what should the board do if that
Yeah,
happens?
so if that situation were reversed, let's say somebody emails me or emails the entire board, I respond individually. And then they respond to the entire board, including my response, which may have had some opinion or something like that. And now the whole board's heard my opinion, which I believe is generally the cutover for a meeting. It was an
They
opinion.
could, you're sort of dancing with a potential meeting there. I would say in that situation, you still are not deliberating yet. All right, if it stops there, I think you're fine. Where you're gonna find a problem is if then others start chanting. I mean, just sitting there reading something in and of itself is not a meeting. All right, so if people are just sitting there reading it, arguably they're not participating in the deliberation or discussion, right? However, if they're like, well, since you asked and Jeremy asked that question, I also have an opinion on it, and it becomes a conversation. That's the kind of thing where if the board knows the law, they're gonna be like, hey, guys, hello, we can't do this. Jeremy, come talk to me specifically, or something like that, so that it's a one-on-one, or even a two-on-one for a 5-member board is fine. But when the issue is, if a quorum is in the room where it happens. In the room where it happens.
I knew I got the exact, my brain's the same word.
I know.
So the appropriate response then would be for one of the board members to try and inform a member of the public that they will communicate with them on the sideline, but legally they are not allowed to basically try and handle it best they can.
Yeah, I think if I were a conscientious board member in that situation, I would chime into everybody. Hey, you guys, we don't want to have an illegal public meeting here. Why don't I just go talk to Jeremy one-on-one? Just leave it at that. And that way you have a paper trail that you flag the problem and you're going to stop it here. I think that's a good.
And that's a good idea, because we did recently have an incident where a member of the public emailed all of us at once. Jeremy individually replied, and Darla also individually flag, and I think that they were upset that they didn't hear from more of the board. But maybe that's a good reminder at the point, whoever's chair needs to reply to remind everyone this can't be a public meeting, and Darla, please give your reply, or Jeremy,
Yeah.
whoever asked,
Yeah,
one
yeah.
reply to the public.
That's a good idea, yeah, and copying the member of the public, we can't all respond at the same time. Darla, could you follow up on that with the public member?
Right.
And then if it's something that has to come back to the entire board, then Darla would do, and she'd bring it to the board. That would be the appropriate way to handle it. Okay, I'm gonna wind this up because we've been here a long time. We won't get into the weeds in executive session, except to say that there are specific reasons why you can go into executive session, and if that reason is not spelled out in statute, you cannot do it. All right, and your notice has to be clear what the authority is for going into the executive session, and that includes the statutory site, which are all in one spot. 192.660 has all of them. Executive session, and I'll just point this out by way of illustration because I think it's interesting. This is the statute 192.630, which says all meetings of the governing body of a public body shall be open to the public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting except as otherwise provided by, and then you have ORS 192.610. So there's this range of statutes here, 610 to 690. This second paragraph says a quorum of a governing body may not meet in private for the purpose of deciding on or deliberating toward a decision, except as otherwise provided for in the same range of statutes. So this says you must meet in public unless there's a statute that says otherwise. This says you cannot meet in private unless there's a statute that says otherwise. So this is exactly the same thing in two different ways. The point being that that range of statutes, 192, 610 to 690, contains all the reasons one could go into executive session. And if it's not there, it's that'd be another topic for another day, but be familiar with what those are. And if when in doubt, ask your lawyer for that. This is all, we won't go through a lot of this. Reminder that public meetings laws are now ethics issues. The Oregon Ethics Commission must annually prepare the training. So they're required annually to provide the training. I think they're finding it a harder job than they thought, bigger job than they thought. So it's continuing to, I don't know if I can play this if I'm not connected to the internet. Probably not. It's kind of a fun little video, but we're not going to play it. Just ruined everything. Okay. Whoops. We are at time, and I want to be respectful of that because you guys have been very patient and sitting through all this. Any questions on anything or any further comments that you want to offer? Yeah.
This training, the ethics training you're talking about, is that like, do a lot of people go to it? Is it online? And is that, I'm just there, so I have to go through jurisprudence. Is that similar to that kind of thing where you're getting the sort of the legal?
Well, so there's kind of now two different categories. I think the one that Darla was referring to is the general ethics. And that is the Ethics Commission occasionally will offer that through them. And I'm guessing there's probably a video option, but I couldn't tell you for sure. You have to check with them. However, I can tell you also, because I've done it sometimes, is the Special Districts Association will do an ethics training that may or may not. But it's mostly right. So you kind of have to find it. But in terms of just ethics training writ large, there's no legal obligation to do it, to take the training. There's legal obligation to follow the law. So the training is a good idea. The second piece of that now is that the public meetings training for elected officials is now required. So that is also administered now by the Ethics Commission. In order to find the training, I believe if you went to the Oregon Ethics Commission's website, they list when their trainings are, and they offer trainings. For now, as far as I know, my understanding is the School Boards Association does it for schools. How they got their stuff approved, I don't know. And then
there's another law firm, Barry Ellsman Hammond, which represents a lot of cities, and they were able to get theirs approved. I haven't talked to them on how to do that. To my knowledge, the only authorized people to teach it are those 3 entities. So if you want the one that's been blessed, I would recommend going through the Ethics Commission.
So you made the comment that when people are serving for their term, that they need to take this. That's what I was trying to get a feel, because there's the board here. Some people are coming on, now, and so would the whole board do it, or just that person, or? how does that work?
Well, the obligation is per individual. Okay, so the board can do it all together, which would be a fun adventure, or you can each individually. The obligation, ethics obligations are personal to the elected official. So complying with the laws are required by you as an individual. And if you violate the law, you personally are responsible for them. So ethics are not a board thing, they're an individual elected official. So with that said, every elected official of a entity of a big enough size, which I think you guys are at that or close, right? Is required to take the training at least once per year.
And how long is that training?
If my understanding is, I don't know if any of you know Shantha Carter at SEO, she's one of my favorite people ever, but she took it and she's like, it was 3.5 hours long. I haven't gone, but my understanding is that the one that they're currently teaching is about 3 hours plus or minus.
And is there testing with it, or is it just?
I don't think so. I think you just have to go.
If the next one, June 26th at 2 p.m., 4:30 p.m. online.
It is online. Is it live online or is it recorded online? Does it say
Well, I would think
live?
I guess we live with the date for it, and you have to pre-register.
Okay.
If the school offers one, can we cross over and go to the school one?
That's a good question. I'm gonna speculate yes. I think if you're on multiple boards, you just have to go to one of them that covers all the boards. It would be kind of dumb to make you take it multiple times if you're on multiple boards. So I would say do it once and call it good, and if they have beat with that, they can tell you. But as far as I know, there's also no recording requirement. Yeah.
I was gonna ask you about the enforcement. It's probably if you get in trouble and you
Yes.
didn't.
Exactly. I think that would be one of those things. Again, this is something that was mandated by the legislature, and it's going to be in flux for a while because it's a big job, and I think they're going to end up probably tweaking the process quite a bit, and maybe even saying uncle and saying, hey, lawyers, if you are willing to teach this in your way, we'll let you use that. That would be good.
Or the first one in the door, law firm you mentioned, Southern Doms.
Maybe I could.
Oh, thanks.
Where I'm a competitor with their firm. You could become friends for that. Thank you all for your attention. I'm going to be packing up. If you have any individual questions, please feel free to bring them, but thank you for your time and attention. I hope it was helpful. And again, I work with the board, so the board will let me know if there's anything further that they need.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more time? You said, but then the 4 years, was that 2 months?
The ethics commission is required to teach it annually, but you only have to take it once per year.
One, okay, yeah, I heard it.
There should be at least once a year, there should be a post level, but you only have to teach it.
Oh, perfect.
And when did that start?
Well, the law passed, I want to say 2023, but it took them a while that they had to adopt administrative rules. So it actually started, I want to say, beginning of 2024 or November of 2020.
So George, I took it first and.
Right.
Share.
So pyramid irons, middle of this. We required to take it, to know.
Before the end of the term.
Okay, so even because we're in a term when it became law, so then if that takes that.
Exactly.
Just check.
We're gonna want this to that, subcontractors.
That's right.
Just trying to get.
I try, again, part of it is that I've been doing this kind of market worship for a long time, and I happen to believe it. But with that said, there's this level of brand where they want it taught, in my experience, it was And they're like, well, I said, well, why don't you have this rules? But I'm talking with them. I said, do we have to include all the statutory sites? Like every time you say something, you have to do the site. Like, where's the people? And that, there's, you know, that's a lot of stuff. And then furthermore, there's a set of administrative rules that are to implement all this. And every time you have to cite all the administrative rules, it's like, so it's like, and I said, why is that necessary? I think it's just the principle. And they said, well, people need to know where to do that. And I said, well, I've been teaching this to special district. Well,
Yeah.
and I said, I've been teaching this to special district board members for a long time, and most of them are not gonna go look up the law. I mean, they don't want to, or they kind of. The whole point of taking this training is to get trained, so you don't have to go look up the law, right? So I think they're being overly slow because they're teaching. My hunch is that they're gonna start backing off because doing it the way they're doing it is going to take freaking forever. And it's gonna be, they're gonna be flogging people to know. Right, that if they don't make it easy and accessible and relatively fun, it's gonna be hard.
Whatever talking.
Someone will read it at that piece.
Yeah, and then everyone will be like to it, they'll be overwhelmed. So, then you come in with a bad. But I think it really would be live, because you can't tell who really watches it. You'll be running while people are watching.
That's how I do some of my continuing education. I do the reporting on it, I'm there, but I'm just doing that.
Oh,
It's good.
This is good, thank you.
Good, you're welcome.
All right, everybody, thank you for joining. We're gonna end the meeting.
Yeah, that's good.
Thing about, you know, mentioned to my clients, I find park and rec folks tend to be the most